Hello everyone, welcome back to another stream as always. Hope you're doing well. House of Redwine, Hilcone, Mr. Jigalag, welcome in, and Elden Enthusiast, nice to have all of you again. So yesterday on stream we covered a couple videos. I think I might have the order wrong here. All right, yeah, so the first one we covered was What's Hiding Behind Marika and Elden Ring. It was a lore theory by Zafe the Scholar. It was really good. Then we went into Steve's Perspectives video on It's been 2 years that Elden Ring's community is still debating what the game is even about, which sounds like it would be one thing, but it's actually another. It was more or less about the dualism behind Marika and Radagon and the different endings of the game, which is okay, but definitely not what I expected. And then for today, I figured we could check out Manly Reviews, Dark Souls, the Demon Souls of Dark Souls, which I kind of agree with this title to begin with. And then following that up, Dualism, Death, Dung, Elden Ring Theory by Zach Magnus. And then the last video of the night would probably be Marika's the Gloam-eyed Queen, Elden Ring DLC lore speculation by the Emerald Gecko. So I figured have a real zip banger of a final video for the night, depending on how much time we have left and whatnot. So, right, let me get rid of the old videos since we've finished them. And that's where we'll begin today. So, Starling, Galaxy Dragon, Mr. Yada, Alicia, Blackman, welcome back to the stream. How you doing? Alicia's listening from the next stream, playing Elden Ring on your Xbox, mostly exploring. Don't have much time today for getting into figuring out the next boss. Nice. Where are you exploring so far? Hey, Jay Dixon, nice to see you again. All right, so I was really interested in this video from the thumbnail alone because it's kind of making fun of Evangelion and, well, end of Evangelion essentially, because you've got like the Elite Knight helmet in the background over like this red looking lake thing. So I have unironically considered doing a crossover video comparing the lore of Evangelion to Dark Souls, but I just haven't really gotten around to it for one reason or another. I'm also like more concerned about getting like copyright struck for covering Ava and like using some of its music, but it would be a lot of fun to do because there's a surprising amount of parallels. Like the last time I watched Ava last year, I think it was, I was like taking some strategic screenshots before everything. I don't know if I have them super labeled or anything. Okay, yeah. So this is like not too relevant, but here we go, guys. Here's the quintessential Miyazaki FromSoft message for all their game. It's just spelled out in plain text in Ava. You're wrong. Only those with the will to live get to survive. So it's just kind of a fun parallel between the two series, I suppose. Hey, Ponyboy, nice to see you again. You returned successful from your super black shader farm. Nice. Yeah, I still need to do the rest of the weapon quests. I was working on that a little bit earlier today because I was like, oh man, I don't have time. I still need to like try to get the Pantheon stuff done, like the final things, but I just haven't done it. Yeah. Gotta get super black to be super edgy. Thanks for the reminder. So yeah, I still need to do like the sniper stuff, the hand cannon stuff, and the swords, I think, is left for me. But all right, let's go ahead and dive into our first video of the night with Dark Souls, The Demon Souls of Dark Souls by Manly Reviews. So I guess before getting into it, I do want to like talk about that provocative title, because on one hand, it does kind of sound silly, but I actually kind of strongly agree with it. And in many ways, it kind of makes a lot of sense, because Dark Souls is more or less the sequel to Demon Souls, in that it's the game which immediately followed Demon Souls. But I do feel a lot of Demon Souls design elements still within Dark Souls and Elden Ring more specifically. But to call Dark Souls the Demon Souls of Dark Souls is kind of funny, because I tend to call Dark Souls 2 the Dark Souls of the Dark Souls games. And then I guess that kind of makes sense why I feel like Dark Souls 1 would be like the Demon Souls of Dark Souls, because it's not like prohibitively difficult. It's got some like janky elements to it, but it's really not bad. And like once you kind of understand how the games operate, it can be, you know, quite enjoyable. Hey, Scalezi and David Mitchell, nice to see both of you again. Demon Souls whips Eric's ass. My condolences. David thinks we take it too seriously and trying to interpret it. It's kind of fun to do that, though. All right, here we go. Let's dive on in for real this time.
Dark Souls. I love Dark Souls. I love this thing more than Tom Brady loves his own son. And if you're wondering why every YouTuber with a checkmark seems to eventually make a video about this thing, it's because even though we've all played the same game, everyone walks away with it with a different story to tell. It's a deeply personalized experience where the hardest enemy you have to defeat in the game is yourself.
Yeah, I agree with that. And also, damn, the production value out the gate here.
And the camera. I've never seen a game so recommended by other people and so scheduled to addictive that it resembles a prescription. Most community members will even recommend it for a whole host of mental debuffs, and it makes sense. The gameplay of Dark Souls is a digital cold plunge, and its lore and characters are more inspirational than most Goggins podcast clips.
I did not understand. Oh, did I have subtitles off? Yeah, I did. I was like, what the hell did he just say? Anyway, yeah, I really haven't delved into that whole side of the community that talks about like mental illnesses and playing Dark Souls. That might be something I should explore a bit, just to like get a better read on that situation. I'm gonna back it up because I don't know what he said. Hey, two middle fingers, welcome to the stream. Man, nice to see you again. And Clown, nice to see you as well. Kind of reminds you of internet pit stops editing style. Okay, I don't know who that is either. All right. I kind of live in a bubble, it seems. Oops.
And its lore and characters are more inspirational than most Goggins podcast clips.
I was running by
Goggins podcast clips?
Cold plunge, and its lore and characters are more inspirational than most Goggins podcast clips.
Okay.
I was running by a graveyard. I was fat. And I ran by a graveyard, and I looked out there. I was fat. And I'm running a 300-pound man thinking, man, fat.
But its themes of overcoming adversity in the face of defeat go far beyond just its characters. On launch, the original Dark Souls came out of buttfuck nowhere with nothing to its name, in one of the most fragile states a video game can release in, only for it to become one of the most influential titles in the last 13 years of gaming. It created a genre, it created a culture, it created whole-ass jobs for people to just talk about its story on the internet. It inspired hundreds of Souls-like games. Even some good ones. But despite all of its legacy, the Souls franchise wouldn't even exist if it weren't for Sony cock-watching the success of the Xbox 360 during the heat of the console wars and tried to rip off one of their best-selling games. And failed. We'll get to that in a second. But before we get into how this franchise almost didn't even exist and that Demon's Souls actually wasn't created by Miyazaki at the start, I recently had surgery and I live in America. So.
What game is this from? This kind of reminds me of Ratchet and Clank, but anyway. Necropolis, Aaron Vice, nice to have both of you guys in chat again. Internet Pit Stop is a solid channel. Peep them sometime? Okay, cool. And then Eldon said there was a Jacob Geller video on Dark Souls 3 about mental health, but it was a pretty heavy topic. So, okay, maybe that might not be good for stream, but that's just something I'm interested in regardless. I think the only thing that I saw by Jacob Geller, if I'm remembering correctly, was the Lies of P video. And that was really good. Metroid Prime. Oh, why didn't I think of Metroid Prime? Is this Prime? This must be like the remake or whatever you want to call it. Remaster? Because the texture quality is much higher than I remember.
You already know it's sponsor time. Big thanks to Opera GX. I actually reached out to them for them to pay me for an ad slot because I don't know about you guys,
Smart.
but Chrome has been completely shitting itself lately. Ever since YouTube went the whole pay-to-win formula with Premium, I feel like everything's been lagging out constantly, despite the fact that it takes more resources than After Effects. And I pay for Premium. So I decided...
You know what? That might explain some of my issues because I pretty much just use Chrome for like stream stuff. It's like my kind of like pseudo business browser, and I use Firefox like in my normal everyday life. And so maybe that's why I have so many more playback issues on Chrome than I do Firefox. No, I don't think so, because now that I think about it, I do like use this if I watch stuff like during lunch, and I still don't have this issue. I don't know. I'm gonna blame the OBS YouTube interaction here.
Try out Opera GX because all my YouTube buddies are using it, and they...
Necropolis, are you trolling, or do you actually only use Edge now?
They make a lot of kind of mildly unfunny mid-tier jokes on Twitter. And as a mindless consumer, that means something to me. I gotta say, I've been daily driving it for about a couple weeks now, and it's pretty great. I mean, it's a web browser, so like, don't go fucking crazy. Or maybe you should, because Opera kind of mogs the fuck out of Chrome. So let me tell you why. First off, it actually runs YouTube faster than Chrome with like 1/10 of the resources, so it's finally nice to click a YouTube video without it like host migrating. But that's just the start. Say you're someone on the spectrum and you're watching one of those 6-hour-long YouTube video essays on a title that you don't care about and will probably still watch twice. If you open up another tab while it's playing, that window will now show up anywhere on your desktop that you can resize and reposition. That is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Chrome doesn't do that. I don't know why. It gets even better. Opera has these things called mods, which allow you to completely overhaul the look and feel of the browser with things like custom animations, backgrounds, shaders, sounds that play whenever you open or close tabs or type. Yeah, this is nice. It's nice, but it's not the pipe sound effect.
I'm not gonna lie though, to me it does feel a little bit sketchy to be sponsored directly by a browser, because how does a browser like make money off of this, you know? I'll just leave that comment a bit open-ended there.
You can customize the stuff to your heart's content. You can even install a Dark Souls mod, because that's the theme of the video, and maybe life's not depressing enough for you. Opera is loaded with tons of other features too. They have all these app integrations with Discord and Twitter, and they also have this little AI assistant thing for all your quirky little AI needs, because it's 2024 and everything needs that now. Also, every single plugin that works in Chrome also works in Opera, so the transition is super easy. And lastly, Opera actually lets you limit CPU and RAM usage, which is crazy that other programs don't do this. This is like, it's... Opera's fantastic. I'm telling you, Opera GX comes highly regarded.
I think I was muted. I said, yeah, that's probably a really nice feature to have if you're actually worried about something like that.
So download it today for free using the link down in the description. Thank you guys for being patient. Now that I have my medical bills paid, we can go on to the rest of the video. I've been wanting to talk about this game ever since 2015, and to this day, it is still my second favorite experience I've ever had that involves this amount of dudes moaning. The first being Dark Souls 3. But unlike that game, which served as the entry point for many people into the series, the first Dark Souls was the one that originally popped my humanity on the Souls franchise. And ever since my first playthrough, I know I'd be stroking this thing off till the end of time. But man, that sure was not the case, and this runty little thing barely stumbled out into the consoles half finished and into the hands of basically no one. I know you may not remember it, but this hairline does not forget, okay? This game was not the instant hood classic we all thought it was. Which sounds insane to say given the way it's talked about, but in reality, most people didn't give a fuck about the Dark Souls franchise until 5 years after its initial release.
Yeah, he's definitely right about that. I heard about Bloodborne, Dark Souls 1 through word of mouth from a friend who's like, oh man, I love this game because you could kind of fight bosses any way you want and like use whatever build you want, and if something isn't working, you could just change it, and then it'll just work. And then when I actually went through and played Dark Souls, I didn't quite feel exactly the same way that he did about like changing things on the fly, because you're kind of a little bit inhibited by what stats you've leveled. And I made the quintessential beginner mistake of trying to level a bit of everything to try using everything that I got to see what I actually liked. And so my first character just sucked ass, and then I stopped playing the game. I don't remember where I stopped the first time around. I feel like I probably got to Anor Londo, and I think it was literally the before Ornstein and Smo, the little sniper duo in the spot that y'all know what I'm talking about. And so he's definitely right. Dark Souls was not on many people's radar at all. And then I don't know how I feel about him saying Dark Souls popped off more with Bloodborne. He might be right, because my sense of time really gets skewed around this time because I was doing other stuff. And I feel like Dark Souls really took off with the release of Dark Souls 3, which, I mean, I feel like Bloodborne probably boosted a lot of numbers, but then 3 just kind of cemented the legacy of the first one, I think, but I could be wrong. I wonder how you guys in chat feel about that. Necropolis played DS1 on release and hated it so much. Nice. Hey, Mao, nice to see you again. Elden hated Dark Souls after Capra Demon until you decided to give it another try. Ponyboy did DS2 first, then DS3 came out a bit after you finished DS1. Nightmare Maniac, welcome to stream. You got it because you played Demon Souls, as it was a PS3 game at a time when PlayStation indeed didn't have any games. You mean you weren't just playing Killzone constantly? And yeah, Scowleezy brings up a good point that everything got kind of overshadowed by Skyrim in 2011. That's probably pretty fair. Clown's first game was Sekiro. Interesting. Okay, I see. Elden Ring was Galaxy's first Soulsborne. It's really interesting just how wide a variety we have here in the chat alone. David says DS2 came out before Bloodborne, and you remember DS2 having hype because DS1 already found an audience. Interesting. Mr. Yada was Dark Souls 3. Nightmare says, it's kind of a weird thing since DS1 sold over 1 million copies pretty early on. Yeah, I mean, I was in college when Dark Souls 1 came out, so I wasn't paying as much attention. And I did not know it sold that well. I mean, it's not too surprising, but yeah. I just didn't hear about it from anybody until years after the fact. Nice, Clown. All right, let's go back to the video.
Bloodborne gave everyone an unscratchable itch for the formula. As someone who's played this gem on a PS3, Dark Souls really was the Demon Souls of Dark Souls when it came out. But even despite all of its jank and shortcomings, Dark Souls was still able to offer players one of the most unique experiences that you could physically buy in one of those shrink-wrapped DVD box cases with the wrong game in it. Fuck. I couldn't find it. So what made this game so special that it made everyone run out and not buy it until 5 years after its release? Well, it's actually a pretty complicated story, but to understand what was going on around the time of its launch, we have to go back to the year 2011.
Why does this song sound so familiar?
Welcome to the year 2011. Shit's bitchin'. The United States just took out Osama bin Laden, but that's not stopping the game industry from dropping bombs like Skyrim, the official release of Minecraft, Dark Souls, Portal 2, etc. However, over the
Portal
last several
2,
years,
yeah.
there's been growing discomfort over the reduction in gaming difficulty, with many people placing the blame directly on casual players and the companies trying to cater to them. And while that's definitely a factor, in reality, our entire understanding of what a video game could be has radically changed over the course of the 2000s. Games are becoming longer with a heavier emphasis on story and narrative, where deaths play kind of an unnatural part of that experience. Health is now something that can regenerate. Hell, even the term game over feels like something your mom would say when describing the Nintendo Station 360. These aren't necessarily bad things.
Now that I think about it, I legitimately don't remember the last game that has had like a game over screen. I can only think of like variations of "you died," which isn't that big a deal. Obviously, that was like more of an arcade thing. But yeah, I guess it's probably been a really, really long time. It's just been such a legacy burned into our memories from putting our quarters into the arcade that it just stuck. It's kind of wild. Mr. Jagalag's first was Dark Souls 3, then 2, Sekiro, DS1, and Demon Souls, with questionable methods because you don't own a PlayStation before Elden Ring. Interesting. Thank you, Nightmare. By the end of 2011, DS1 sold 2.7 million copies worldwide. Okay, thank you. Looking at me posing like I'm old enough for arcade memories. Oh, just posing? Okay. Hey, Amin, nice to see you again.
Things per se, but for a lot of people, that sense of accomplishment that came from a solid challenge and a shared experience with friends had kind of evaporated. At the very same time though, we saw a massive increase in the inclusion of difficulty sliders, which makes a lot of sense. Rarely does one size ever fit all, and every pussy's different. But some were implemented vastly better than others, sometimes acting as a band-aid for shitty development and lazy balancing. While it did give players the options, most people didn't even know what the options were. To this day, I still don't even know what easy, medium, or hard even translates to half the time. Does it change the number of enemies, the amount of health they have, their accuracy, detection, the amount of items that drop, the puzzles? And if it does, by how much? How the fuck?
Exactly. And Donkey has a really, really good video on this where he says pretty much if you get easy, medium, or hard, you don't know what like the quote unquote dev default is. So it becomes like really problematic trying to scope out what is going to be the most attractive for the individual player, which I definitely agree with. And as what is he called? Manly? Yeah, as Manly is saying here, one of the things that annoys me the most is when you increase the difficulty, nothing changes except enemies get spongier and deal more damage. To me, that's not like difficulty, that's just increased tedium, because like everything's the same, they just hit harder. It doesn't really matter. But when you have enemies gain new movesets or at least vary up the enemy placements, at least that leads to a fresher experience in the long run. So for as much as I do dunk on Dark Souls 2, I do think that they probably have like the best New Game Plus system to some degree, because, you know, they do vary things up slightly, although I think it just ends up becoming a bit spammy in the overall scope of things. There are a few differences which I do like legitimately enjoy, like with what they did with Dukes the Euphrasia, kind of like spawn camping you early when you go into the Crystal Cove area, whatever it's called, when you first walk in that spot. So I do wish that there was more difficulty options included with like New Game Plus cycles for Dark Souls and Elden Ring and whatnot, but yeah, he's bringing up some pretty good points here so far. Hey Buster, nice to see you again. You got 500 hours in Elden Ring? Nice. Yeah, Mr. Jagalag feels the same way. Yeah, so that's kind of like how I felt about Destiny 1. I was like, man, these strikes are boring as hell, because when I was first playing Destiny 1, I was playing solo. I didn't realize like strikes were 3-man activities, so I put it on like the highest level difficulty, and I literally ran out of ammo trying to like kill the boss at the end of one of the strikes, and I was just like so beyond frustrated because like nothing changed mechanically. I just did no damage, and everything else just did way more damage.
fuck am I, a new player to a game, supposed to know what best suits the gameplay? I much prefer having competent devs kind of figure that out for me, or at least change in-game things to match what difficulty I want. That's just me though. Obviously, a lot of games greatly benefit from this, but back then, people got super heated over this shit. As a result, this created fertile soil for a game that had greater difficulty to release around this time and carve itself a niche player base. Yeah, y'all know what's coming next. Ooh, big twist, Dark Souls, the big hard game to spank all the people in the zippers and whips. That much is painfully obvious. But it's really not the full picture. In fact, it's just the tip of the iceberg. For us to understand where this game is even coming from, we have to go all the way back to the start of the 7th generation of console wars, back in 2000. It all starts with this one game called Demon's Souls. No, stop! Every motherfucker on YouTube gets this wrong. See, most people think that the director of the Soul series, Miyazaki, just decided to one day create Demon's Souls and then, we were off to the races. In reality, the game was already being developed before he even entered the picture while he was playing with Gundams in the corner. The real story of Demon's Souls starts with the release of the Xbox 360. And it is killing Sony. When developing the 360, Microsoft made the decision to speedrun 80% the creation of the console, and while it gave it a pretty nasty case of ringworm, it ended up beating Sony to market by a whole year, which was a huge blow to their finances. After all, you're more likely to buy the console that your friends already own, and that's especially true with the way they were pushing Xbox Live.
Check this out.
And if that wasn't enough, the console was...
Oh god, old Xbox Live lobbies. That was definitely a period in gaming. So yeah, even though I do like a lot of the Sony consoles, I will definitely say Xbox 360 blew PS3 out of the water. In many regards, I don't like, maybe PS3 was technically faster, but PS3 back then is kind of facing the issue that Xbox is facing now, where they have like no notable exclusives, and they just kind of floundered for a while, which is why they whipped themselves back into shape when they came out with the PS4. But overall, I think like Xbox 360 did a lot of stuff right, between the way that they redesigned the controller, the way that the UI worked for 360 was just a lot cleaner than the PS3. That's actually probably one of my biggest complaints to this day about like the Sony consoles. It's just so damn prohibitive. There's like very little customization, and it's freaking 2024. Like, the PSP had more customizability options than the PS5 does. It's like, come on, bro. Anyway, who just walked back in? Crimson, nice to see you again. Rob, Bloody Miura, and I think that's it. All right. Crimson says, difficulty is best with one difficulty on the harder side, but not unmanageable with optional easier options. I think having like challenge modes is a good way to like up the ante for that stuff. So I think Hollow Knight does a pretty good job of that. And Hollow Knight also has like a lot of ways that one can interact with the game, which I think also increases my personal enjoyment of that game in specific. Yeah, and Eric says Halo blew it out of the water. Yeah, absolutely. Halo revolutionized the FPS genre. And then I think, to a lesser extent, Call of Duty was to Halo what Halo was to, like, Quake, I guess. The Red Ring of Death gives you nostalgia. That's kind of a funny thing to be nostalgic about in the grand scheme of things, but I'm here for it. Xbox has the worst dashboard ever. Is that now? Or are you talking about the OG? Because I was talking about 360 specifically. Ella Delia said, the best difficulty depends on the type of the game. For some games, it makes perfect sense to have a you win if you sit here for a bit difficulty. For other games, the game shouldn't yield like that. Friend Alex says, you like how Sekiro has difficulty modifiers built directly into the game world itself? What are you talking about? Do you mean like the bell? Because I feel like Sekiro is probably like one of the worst examples of difficulty modifiers, whereas like Elden Ring is a lot more approachable because of the Spirit Ashes, as well as like PC summons. Yeah, well, Kudos Charm and the bell, that's not exactly going to help new people figure out how to play. And hey, Forgeborge and Eladelia, nice to have you guys again. Alright, let's go back in.
It's also half the price of the PS3 whenever that came out. Keep in mind, we were still, for the most part, paying for music back then. Money was tight, people typically only bought one console, and yellow card CDs aren't going to pay for themselves. By the time the PS3 made its way to market, it had already priced itself out of the hands of many potential buyers.
Oh yeah, and then like one big difference between PS3 and the Xbox was that PS3 was also a Blu-ray player. I'm pretty sure the 360 was not. So that's one reason why the PS2 just blew everything out of the water. It's because it was a built-in DVD player and it was like one of the cheapest options on the market. So Sony really sniped a lot of people who weren't really even interested in a game console because they just had like one of the first DVD players on the market. So it was an incredible business decision by them in the long term. But a lot of people didn't really have too much interest in Blu-rays, and I was actually really, really skeptical of it for a long time until my friend with his PS3 bought First Blood, the very first Rambo movie, and I was like, okay, I mean, it's a Rambo movie, whatever. And then like he popped it on and we watched it. I was like, what the hell? Like, holy crap! Like the quality of this is phenomenal. Even though I'm pretty confident, like the movie came out in the 70s, it looked like it came out like a decade later because of like how well they cleaned it up and everything. So that kind of made me a believer in the whole like HD stuff as well as like Blu-rays, because at first I was like really skeptical. It's like, I mean, all of our old stuff seems good enough to me now, but yeah. Anyway, you're currently exploring Caelid and Liurnia. Good luck with that. Have you like fully explored either area before, or is this just like your first time like truly trying to see everything? Not very far, just taking it slow. Nice. First time? Okay. Yeah, so when Elden Ring came out, I took my time going through it, which was kind of rough because like everybody was in a race to do and see everything. So I felt like I was so far behind other people when I was like 40 hours into the game and still in Caelid, but that's because I was exploring like literally everything I could. David says 360 didn't have Blu-ray. They had an options HD DVD drive. Zoomers might not even know what HD DVD drive was, a competitor brand to Blu-ray. Yeah, I knew the HD DVD stuff wouldn't work just because of like the scalability of it wasn't there, because the difference between the technology of the Blu-ray, I mean, for anybody who doesn't know, is that it like literally used a blue laser and could therefore read information much faster than the standard like red lasers of DVDs or something like that. So that's kind of why we still use Blu-rays today, but not DVDs so much. I mean, we still kind of do, but anyway. Yeah, VCRs were still kind of a thing back in these ancient times, as Eldon says. Forgeborch just discovered the jail cave. That one's kind of pretty rough. I do wish there was like a bit more variation in the caves, and that one kind of stands out for being more unique. Hey Cosmos, nice to see you, man. If you don't squeeze 30 hours, if you don't squeeze out 30 hours first into the DLC, you'll riot. Did you catch that interview where Miyazaki was asked like how long the DLC will be? And it's like, well, I would answer, but after everyone was super mad at my answer for the base game, I'm just not going to. AV Limit, nice to see you too. Did I take notes of the item descriptions while playing, or just used a text dump? So typically the way that I go through like a first playthrough of a game, I just kind of treat it like an action arcade game. So I would just read this stuff and then just kind of like let it sink in my brain, but I knew I wouldn't necessarily get absolutely everything on a first playthrough or really remember where everything was. So once I beat the game, I went back and started to collect every item, because that's just something I kind of enjoy, as much as a pain of an ass it is at times. And then once I like got all the items, I just kind of like started looking more at the text dumps and comparing the English to the Japanese for any discrepancies that I could find. Do we see trick weapons in the DLC? It doesn't seem like it. I really wish we could get some, but I feel like if they weren't in the base game, unless they went back and updated the base game with that stuff, I'm kind of skeptical we'll get it in the DLC. Hey, Jonathan Grover, welcome to the chat, and thanks for the $2 super chat. Please explain envoys, please, and thank you. So do you mean the Oracle envoys, like the white lizard, godskin-esque looking like things in Leyndell, as well as the Erdtree? Because there's really not a lot of lore that coincides with them. They shoot faith bubbles as opposed to the sorcery-style bubbles of the Claymen down in the underground regions, and they're said to try to hail in a new era, and in some ways they almost seem to be adjacent to Mikola, but in the 1.0 version of the game, there were no oracles in Leyndell, so it seemed more Mikola aligned back then, but now it's a little bit more ambiguous. So that's right. I did say that I think they kind of look like godskins, like the literal godskin, but they're just said to be inhuman, and what affiliations they have is up for grabs. Messmer's the Lord of Oracle Envoys? Okay. Alright. Let's go back into the video.
It didn't help that it also had like no games on launch. Shocker! At this early on, Sony is doing everything in their power to increase their market share, so they start spying on Microsoft for some ideas. One franchise in particular catches their eye, which goes by the name of the Elder Scrolls. They see that Oblivion is kicking ass and taking names, and they want a piece of that open world action RPG shitty ass AI market share.
I love dogs. Doesn't everyone?
No, they fucking don't!
So they start shopping around in search of some jolly cooperation with the studio that can create something similar, when they spot a medieval dark fantasy series called Kingsfield by FromSoft. So they hit them up, they slip them a crisp $20 bill under the table and say, we want a game that can dethrone Oblivion. So they shake hands and begin to create their own version of the Elder Scrolls.
You know, that's kind of wild thinking about this now, because even though and I'm pretty confident, like most of us here love Dark Souls, trying to legitimately think that it could overthrow Oblivion is a really tall order, and I don't dislike Dark Souls by any means, but like it's almost like apples and oranges, because I feel like Oblivion was kind of like the first big RPG game that kind of started to go the more like Ubisoft direction in terms of like making things a lot more watered down for good reason. But Dark Souls went the complete opposite direction, kind of like back to the roots of video games. So I don't know how it could like cannibalize it, but maybe that's part of like Sony's strategy, not necessarily cannibalizing Oblivion's numbers, but trying to like make a draw for a similar type of player, I guess, just to expand the market base, I guess. I don't know. Never really considered that aspect of the two competing franchises there. So then David asked, what do I think is underneath the bodies of the oracles? I don't really know, because they look like pale blue, teal kind of whites, but they're all bubbly. They kind of remind me of the Godskin noble robes. Is that just their anatomy? I think so. So I've wondered whether or not they were related to Albinaurics, but they kind of don't seem to be. They bleed red at the very least. Blackman said Oblivion blew him away when he first played it. Jagalag loves Oblivion. You find it hilarious that Bethesda and FromSoft's trajectories are inverse now? Well, I think part of that is because Bethesda grew too big, and I feel like that's a really big problem with like AAA gaming at this point. They're becoming too big to succeed. Unironically, I think. Like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, I think it's a great game, but I see a lot of bloat and a lot of dev time and so much attention paid to the most minute details, which I love, but I can't necessarily think that those costs are justified for how much time and resources they have to put in for it. Oh man, I didn't know that, V-Limit. Shoutouts to when Capcom stopped working on Devil May Cry because they were hoping DMC4 could compete with the Call of Duty sales. Oh god. Oh man, just that's a certain level of faith in one's own product there, isn't it? That's great. Jonathan asks, why are some lands between residents tall and skinny like a stock and others are not? Are they albinorcs? So the commoners are kind of weird. I don't know why exactly they're tall. You might be able to explain that they're kind of like Newman related. They might have like some genetic lineage to Marika. But the more dissatisfying answer, which is kind of like the more typical FromSoft answer, is they tend to make enemies that are bigger than the player character because they might be a bit easier to read, I guess. Hey D-Rock, nice to see you again. Necropolis agrees. Oblivion's awesome, but Skyrim's just alright. Pony disagrees with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. FF7 is all minigames and post Midgar. It's faithful as hell. Could you elaborate like with what you disagree with specifically? Because if you're talking about the remake, I kind of agree, but I feel like Rebirth is a good game. I wasn't as much of a fan as the minigames as I would have liked to have been, but I feel like the original Final Fantasy VII also had a bunch of minigames, like you were saying. Ella Dealey thinks the white cloth could be something that Oracle envoys wear. I mean, that could potentially align with it potentially ushering in a new age. It's just there's almost no Oracle lore. Oracle lore. There's a less Oracle lore than even the Godskin lore. Blackman says, if the next Elder Scrolls is as watered down as Skyrim was to Oblivion, you're out. I mean, Starfield. Yeah, Necropolis has got it. Okay. Going back to the video.
They start building this thing in about a year or two after the development. It's a congratulations, it's a piece of shit. It's so bad they can't even get their prototypes to run. Hey, FromSoft, ever happened to that Oblivion clone that we commissioned for you guys that was supposed to be pushing the boundaries of what video games can physically do in this day and age? Sir, we're the studio that made this. Yeah, that's our bad. It's so hopeless that Sony and FromSoft just agree to write the whole thing off as a silly round and move on. Sony ended up getting the rights to Oblivion anyway, so it worked out for them. However, word eventually makes its way to this guy named Miyazaki, who takes one...
Yeah, this has definitely got the big vibes of trying to go to Camelot in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and then just dipping out once you remember that it's a silly place.
Look at the wreckage and sees the opportunity of a lifetime. So he asks around to see if he can take point on the game and lead it into a different direction and actually turn this thing into something marketable. The beauty part is though, even though he's never done something like this, if the project fails, no one gives a fuck. It's the perfect environment for him to spitball ideas with absolutely nothing to lose. So he dumps the idea of it being an Oblivion clone and goes in almost the opposite direction. He wanted to recreate that feeling of exploring a foreign world where you feel cautious with every step you take, and create an action RPG that didn't rely on simple quest completion as the reward. He instead set out to make the gameplay itself feel satisfying, compelling players to strategize and improve in order to overcome challenges, by making the game extremely punishing, placing the brunt of the responsibility on the player's skill itself instead of just artificial difficulty. So when you die in the game, you don't think it's just because the game is poorly designed and unjust, rather I screwed up because I'm a dumbass and I need to be more careful. This turned death into a very teachable moment for the player, something you really want to avoid doing because it halves your fucking health. Hard but fair, my ass. Miyazaki definitely went a little too far in this one, and even he knew it. Because when it came time for him to represent the game to Sony executives, he actually had to hide the fact that when you die, you lose half your health. And he was actually legitimately worried that he had made the game too hard once they had finally baked the whole thing together. But oops, too late, time to test the game out. They finally release it at the Tokyo Game Show, and people just kinda hate it. In one of the most historical moments of the franchise, the Sony executive even went on record after playing it and said this is an unbelievably bad game. And
it's so funny that that quote always comes up because of how much he just kind of loves the franchise now. I believe he went on stage and like demoed Bloodborne in front of everybody, or maybe he didn't demo it, but he definitely fought a watchdog of the Old Lords and got his ass kicked. He's like, I love this game, despite his prior hatred of Demon Souls.
The Sony executive even went on record after playing it and said this is an unbelievably bad game. And to his credit, this is something that everyone says when they try the Souls games out for the first time. It's just, you gotta get it out of your system. We'll get back to this. But the president is so ticked off by the game that he doesn't even let them release it outside of the country. It finally launches officially in Japan, and it just completely tanks, which always seems to be the case no matter what game I talk about on this channel. I swear, those motherfuckers only play like Pokemon and Pachinko. But people start importing the game into the West, and the sales numbers grow to about 100,000. Nothing huge here, but that's much better from 20K, and pretty good for word of mouth. FromSoft are actually kinda happy about it, and people start asking for an official release in the States, so Atlas, yes, that Atlas, for some reason, roll the dice on it and decide to import the thing officially into the US.
So I've actually always been a really big fan of Atlas's games because they're niche, but they kind of know what they're doing. And so to me, they've always released a lot of very interesting titles that might not have a lot of mainstream appeal, but they're comfortable with that, and they like kind of cater towards their audience. And I'm really glad that they kind of like hit it big with Persona, even though I'm not as big of a fan of Persona 5 and the combat style that evolved the Mega 10 series past like, you know, Shin Megami Tensei 3. Actually, I don't remember when the battle system changes to the bonus attacks and stuff. Anyway, that's not too important. That does remind me, I do want to go back and eventually play Unicorn Overlord. There's just so many games that are always being added to my list of things to play. Anyway.
For some reason, roll the dice on it and decide to import the thing officially into the US. And sales ramp up. Over the next year, it would grow to sell 1 million copies, thanks in part to GameSpot elevating it to Game of the Year, which was an incredibly bold move at the time. There was a time period before game journalism turned into game journalism.
And GameSpot's 2009 Game of the Year is...
Shitty USB mic.
Demon Souls.
Souls, so satisfying. And then there's all those dudes waiting there for you hard. And it just makes you feel this camaraderie even though you can't actually them in the game.
Here's the crazy part in all this. Miyazaki doesn't know that. The sales of Demon Souls didn't pick up until a whole year after he was already developing Dark Souls. The poise stat on this guy is like insane. Even though he's still operating on the premise that Demon Souls was a failure, he still is confident enough that he knows what he needs to do this time around to perfect his formula. And once they get word of the cult following growing in the West, these guys go full steam ahead.
It's back with Dark Souls. Let's see what punishment they're dishing out.
The music right here is just so damn like 2011. Oh man, it's kind of like nostalgic. It's like going home after school and like catching a UFC event on like the freaking Spike channel. Anyway, that USB mic gag, nice. Hey Jesse, all right, nice to see you again. Persona 5 is the only one you've played, so I really recommend the original Persona. There's a caveat to that. So Persona 1 came out on the PS1, and I really love the soundtrack that came out with it, and it just like really makes it. It's got, you know, some scuffed localization artifacts and a bit of what one might call like backward censorship. Anyway, it was remade for the PSP, but it like started adding in like this random ass J-poppy soundtrack, and it's just kind of awful. So nonetheless, like the story of it and the gameplay was still pretty decent, still standard fare like JRPG, but it's kind of like more occult and grounded than a lot of the other Mega 10 games. So yeah, I still think those games stand up today. But it's definitely a very different vibe than Persona 5. I think Persona 5 was like one of the most brilliant art directions for a non-AAA type game in probably like video game history at this point, because it's really carried by the style of its art rather than like super high graphics. And the fact to me that to this day, before Final Fantasy 15 came out, they sent out like a survey, and they're like, what games are you looking forward to? And they're like, Persona 5. I'm like, wait a second. This is just a huge red flag to me that like Final Fantasy 15, which has been in development for like literally over 10 years at that point, is worried about Persona 5. And so I kind of wish I like listened to myself with that like red flag, because Final Fantasy 15 just didn't really stand up to snuff. Feels bad, man. Hey, Paul, nice to see you again. I have to play the Dark Souls Bartholomew trailer for people who don't know it. It defines your life. Okay, maybe remind me after this video, because I don't think I've ever heard of it. Ponyboy says, P5 is possibly the most stylish game. I don't know about that, because I remember games like Beautiful Joe back in the day. Not that I actually played it, but no one does the UI like the Persona series at this point, and the music. Definitely top-notch for style. Alright.
Dark Souls, let's see what punishment they're giving.
What a brilliant transition there. Oh my god. Stop! This is my footage.
This time around, Miyazaki has unequipped the gloves and is working one-on-one with every single developer. No creative managers, no micromanagers. This is some organic-ass farm-to-table development. He went ahead and named every single character, boss, enemy in the game, as well as every single line of text that appears, including menus. This guy knows exactly what he wants. However, it isn't just his vision. He explicitly instructs his artists to always add their own flair and touches to whatever designs they're working on, so they can give him a fresh perspective that he can incorporate. It's even reported that he'd constantly philosophize with his team about all the esoteric concepts of the game, and how they all make sense in the context of the world they are continually writing and rebuilding. The reason he's doing this is that it's creating basically a bunch of little mini Miyazakis that are all on the same exact page as him during development. That's why he was so confident by letting the development of Dark Souls 2 go to like other members of his staff, because he wanted to see what the series would turn into without it being limited to him. Although that kind of had its own developmental hell, and they ended up actually firing one of the directors, but that's a different, that's a whole video I've been waiting to make.
Yeah, Dark Souls 2, in that regard, is kind of like the Demon Souls of Dark Souls, because they had to get rid of directors, but yeah.
Miyazaki's spurging out on all the details when ding ding ding, they run into a problem and it's pencils down, you gotta turn into shit. And it's not finished. Not even close. So he does that thing where you just fill in the rest of the bubbles and hope you get a few extra points in. That's why there's areas in the second half of the game that feel kind of content-aware filled. Although they made one of the most revolutionary games in about a 2-year span, so I don't know, take it with a grain of salt. There's actually one.
I honestly feel like that's almost par for the course at this point with the FromSoft games. Bloodborne definitely suffered from that. Dark Souls 1 suffered from that. Dark Souls 2, do we even need to talk about that? Dark Souls 3, same old story. Maybe Sekiro is a bit better, but yeah, maybe Sekiro is a bit better on that front. I don't know how chat feels about that. And then, of course, Elden Ring with its barren mountaintops of the giants and that kind of final boss rush being a bit rough there. And then Oddspace337, welcome to the stream. Jaglag's amazed that DST was even finished with its dev cycle. Ella Delia says Miyazaki's games seem to suffer from having drastically more ambition than they have timeline. True story. I would just love to see what the vision a FromSoft game would end up with if they were given unlimited resources to craft such a vision. Oh god, Scowleasy, you finished DS2 more than the devs did? Brutal.
One final problem that they're running into now, and that's they don't have a name for the game. Sony still technically owns the rights to Demon Souls, and they can't use that. So this fucking genius decides to name the game Dark Race. Like, dog, how do you not? Like, that's already a... They're in the game.
To be fair, like, Dark Race is probably... Actually, I don't know what a Dark Wraith is called in Lord of the Rings in Japanese. I need to look it up. But yeah, Dark Race is kind of like Dark Wraith, I suppose. But probably not what he was going for. But yeah, definitely a little bit of ocular occlusion on his part there.
Whatever. So he tries to settle on a name by calling it Dark Ring, which I think is fine, but apparently people around him were saying that's a euphemism for butthole, so it's Project Dark for the time being. It makes its first public appearance at Tokyo Game Show once again under that same name, only for it to get quickly overshadowed by demos of Devil May Cry and The Last Guardian. The game finally launches globally, and Demon Souls fans are stoked on it. Weirdly enough, critics actually received it quite well. Its level design and satisfying combat earned it high marks for being quite different than the grain of current releases at the time, branding it with that notorious hard but fair reputation. But that reputation only applied to the people that actually saw the game through. For everyone else that played it, the game was notoriously hard and bullshit and kind of ugly and Makes no fucking sense. And what are those hitboxes? And I swear I rolled that. I fucking rolled that! Only the first half of that hard but fair reputation seemed to stick to its branding, coming across as more of a gimmick to uninformed players. To the point where they even branded the DLC of the game Prepare to Die Edition to lean into that word of mouth, because at the time it was the only thing they really had going for them in terms of organic marketing.
I'm so hard right now.
But aside from that niche of cult followers from Demon Souls, the real reason Dark Souls didn't pick up into an instant hood classic wasn't because the people that played it were getting pissed. It's because people weren't playing it at all. See, whenever a game is shown off through trailers or advertisements, its ultimate goal is to convey to you an experience. That's where the value is to a player. Turns out, it's really fucking hard to do that if your game is unsexy. And Dark Souls had some pretty saggy-ass granny titties upon release. Around this
Yeah, now that I think about it, I don't even remember the Dark Souls 1 trailers. When I think of a DS1 trailer, I literally just think of the prologue cutscene.
time, games like Assassin's Creed, Devil May Cry, God of War all had not only phenomenal experiences, but they translated visually to just look like fun as shit games on their own. Watching Kratos swing around the blades of Olympus, it just makes every dude in the room look at it and just say, hell yeah. That's what you want from your games. For example, I personally have never pulled a fire alarm, but do you think that's ever stopped me from fantasizing about it every single time I walk into a room and see one? No, I mean, they're practically begging for it. Look what it's wearing. Same principle applies here. Now, take that same logic and apply it to Dark Souls, and watching some tanky dude fat rolling only to eat shit later and slowly earn the right to get another hit in is not screaming satisfying achievement. Not to say it's not there, but this game.
Hold on, Ding Dong pulled the fire alarm in 3rd grade. Tell me more, man. Good times? Okay. Hey, Tony, nice to see you again. Eladelia wants Miyazaki to make a game named Dark Eclipse and watch the people going nuts trying to figure out which of his other games Eclipse motifs he's building on. All of them. Hey, Potato Poker, nice to see you again.
Play doesn't sell itself anywhere near as well as the other games.
Nah, I mean, I don't like that joke pretty much at all. I wouldn't even say it's passable.
The franchise. Like, this is literally the gameplay footage that IGN showed when it was making its debut of the game to millions of people across the world.
You have played Demon Souls a lot, and now you move on to Dark Souls. There won't be a connection even with the online player.
Okay.
It's just not sexy. And this is no surprise to the developers. Even Miyazaki admitted this after he released Demon Souls at Tokyo Game Show, saying, quote, "You can't possibly understand its approach in 5 minutes." But aside from the gameplay, the actual graphics of the game aren't doing it any favors either. I personally love them. I think it rips. Sue me. I know it's nostalgia, the same way I look at like old PS2 games or something. I think it's beautiful. But let's.
So I'm gonna be real here, and I do think that like the graphics kind of suck for Dark Souls 1, but I feel like the way that they suck actually helps its world building in a certain kind of sense. Like, you're not really supposed to admire the world for its beauty. You're supposed to like get the vibe like, man, everything is freaking run down and it sucks, and somehow you need to fix it. And because like all of these buildings are so dilapidated and ancient, it makes the world feel lived in a way that is not very common in a lot of other games. And this might be a little bit of a weird comparison at first, but although it's kind of taken for granted now, I think one of the more compelling visual aspects of Star Wars when that movie trilogy came out was that the robots that were featured in that film kind of all were pretty dingy and banged up for the most part, and they didn't like look brand new and super futuristic. And that was a really big bucking of the trend at the time in the like 70s when retrofuturism was still like pretty much at its height and wanting to make the future always seem very sterile and flashy. Not Dark Souls, Star Wars took that trope and is like, no, people live in these galactic worlds, and when like people live, like things kind of, you know, gain a bit of character to them over time. And so I feel like that vibe has a huge importance for Dark Souls. So surely like the graphical fidelity could have potentially been better, but I think overall it does serve its purpose very well. Bucking the Buck Rogers trend, yeah. Adds a layer of history. Chat's going off, great. Poll says, weren't the textures seriously held back by console hardware too? There's probably components of that for sure, because yeah, PS3 was notoriously difficult to code on, but I honestly don't really know the specifics of that too much at all. Look at that health bar. I didn't even notice. I saw the liquid humanity and I was like, damn, that's a lot. Okay.
Let's be real, it's 2011 now, this console came out in 2006, graphics have come a long ways, and we're actually at the end of the console's life cycle here. And this thing looks like some Call of Duty 3 shit. The standards have risen since then, and while graphics aren't everything, they're not nothing. After all, half the music I listen to on YouTube is solely determined by the thumbnail alone. I have zero clue what low poly drum and bass sounds like, but for some reason, this picture kind of tells me. Especially given that just a year prior.
That is such a weird comparison, but I kind of understand it somehow. It makes sense. Like, I have no idea what the hell that meant until I saw that picture go with it. I'm like, okay, this is like N64 sound file type beats. Got it. It's kind of nostalgic. Like, that music right there just kind of reminded me of like an old game called 2 Extreme, where you either skateboarded or snowboarded down tracks and could like beat the hell out of other contestants and like do tricks. Great times. Anyway, Galamoth, you thought I wasn't streaming tonight? There was that possibility because some people like to apparently shoot fireworks on Memorial Day, and I have a very anxious dog when it comes to fireworks, and he like tries to climb up me. He's kind of tucked under a blanket right now, so I was laughing as I was looking at him. So yeah, earlier in the night, there were some fireworks going off. He did try like climbing up on me, so I had to like lie down with him and console him for a bit. But right now, I have like all the windows closed. I have my fan running at maximum speed for like a bit of white noise, and so he's been big chilling. So we're doing all right. And hey Nemo, nice to see you again. That's part of why you loved the original Halo. It's sci-fi, but the human tech and architecture was dingy, industrial, and very down to earth. Exactly. Same thing with like Portal to a certain extent. Like it has like a very clean exterior, but then like as soon as you start really delving into it, you could see the wear and tear on the edges of the experiments and whatnot. Hey, Chucanosaur, nice to see you again. Oh, Jesse R. loved 2 Extreme too. Nice. Yeah, so we do have some CBD, but I didn't think that it was going to be bad for Memorial Day. It really hasn't been. He's getting better with the fireworks as he's aging, but he's still a clingy little guy. All right, let's go back to the video.
God of War released in 2010, which completely redefined what people expect graphically out of the system, and that game ran at double the frame rate of Dark Souls, which would barely hit 30 on a good day. I distinctly remember—
Oh god, like the original— Okay, he's gonna talk about it, so I'll just shut up.
Blighttown running at a peanut buttery, chunky, smooth 15 frames per second. A lot of areas of this game would give it an FPS that would make Ocarina of Time look like an esport by comparison. Which is even wilder when you consider that the thing that's making your system chug looks like that. The game—
So I saw a new video like a week or two ago by Digital Foundry that said they've come up with a new way to kind of emulate stuff for the N64 on PC to like kind of run it natively, and this will allow like super upscaling of those N64 games and like actual like ray tracing in them. Now I really don't give a rat's ass about ray tracing for a freaking N64 game, but actually having seen the footage for Digital Foundry and looking at how much smoother the games get upscaled with their textures and stuff, it is an actual transformative experience to me that's kind of almost equatable to how I felt about like normal ass DVDs and VHS tapes to the visual upgrade and the fidelity of like Blu-rays. So I don't remember what it's called, but that might be worth checking out if they like keep on working on it. So anyway, Nintendo speedrunning their cease and desist right now. Well, here's the thing, because it's not potentially running off of the Nintendo BIOS or whatnot, like emulation is perfectly legal. It just comes down to how one attains their ROMs, essentially. .
The game suffered major performance difficulties, and that's without mentioning the load times, which after every death would be anywhere between 3 to 5 business days. These are the more cosmetic aspects of Dark Souls that made it difficult for new players to stomach, but upon release, the game was very different than the household Prepare to Die edition we've all grown to love. The original Dark Souls gave out a fraction of the souls upon killing bosses, making leveling significantly harder. Enemy AI would aggro way further out and even close the doors behind you in tight spaces. Curses, which have your health, could stack, meaning you could permanently divide your health in half each time. Just some brutalist, unfun shit. This one guy apparently made a video documenting even more of the changes. It's a great watch. I don't want to steal his thunder. Go watch.
Oh yeah, I know Mr. Metagross. He was asking me a lot about the Bloodborne 1.0 version, because I think he must have seen my playthrough on the YouTubes way back when, and I was like, hey, I don't remember like a ton of stuff because I played it a while ago, but check out Meph's wiki for like a ton of answers, so that helped him out. And so for anybody who doesn't know Mr. Metagross, he seems to like really meticulously go through like the day one releases of games and like compares the differences. And so he did do the Bloodborne one a couple months back, so he's like still working on this kind of stuff if you're interested in that kind of thing.
Watch it. But for all the people that managed to get past those hurdles, for most people, the hardest thing was that there were just no resources to understand what any of this stuff meant in the game. When taking your first look at the menu, and I don't know if I'm being graded on a test, I don't know what candle means, not quite sure what a covenant does. To this day, I still don't fully grasp how the upgrade system works, and people are still finding out hidden mechanics within the game like 10 years later. Many veterans of the series will actually encourage new players to go in completely blind, and I think that's kind of a dickhead mentality. While I think people should avoid spoilers, I think every copy of the game should come with at least 3 to 4 older brothers that can educate you on just some of the more hidden mechanics of the game. Like the carry weight, for example, which can completely alter the entire fundamental way the game is played, and it's never mentioned at all once. Thanks, game. Great design. Despite all of this though, it sold fairly well with the right audiences, and while it never caught on to the mainstream at the start, you could argue that the very things that held it back initially were the very same things that led to its explosion years later. By not catering to trends at the time, the game's baffling amount of just not giving a fuck and leaving the player to their own devices ended up delivering players one of the most uniquely satisfying franchises in the history of gaming. Because while Dark Souls may have some of the most annoying player-hating mechanics,
now you still understand the level design of Dark Souls is so good. It's so good, guys. It's so good.
It's still understandable.
Oh man, the salt right there. It's like, that is probably to me the most salty location for DS1. But anyway, Forgeborge asks, was I around for the Rise of Zoli during the DS2 DLC days? No, so I don't remember exactly when I first played Dark Souls 1, but I didn't beat it, and so I kind of like left it alone, because like one of those games, like, oh, maybe I'll come back to it sometime, because I'm not going to let the game beat me, but, you know, temporarily I did. And so when I did finally go back and play through Dark Souls 1, I was in the middle of the ocean, so I had like no internet or anything like that, and I think Bloodborne had come out pretty much like right after I got done with my float. And so I was more interested in Bloodborne than Dark Souls 2, because I didn't even realize that Bloodborne was made by the devs of DS1. It just looked really freaking cool to me, so I got that one. And then I don't really remember the timeline of like how that all worked. I played a bit of Bloodborne, and then I think I stopped the game because like the load times are just killing it for me, and I couldn't like stand it at that point anymore. I mean, I still really like the game. It's just like dying to a boss and then having to wait almost a literal minute between each load in was just a bit rough. And then I had other stuff going on in my life. And then I think Dark Souls 3 came out when I was in Japan, and I bought it, but forgot about it because I still hadn't like played like through Bloodborne. And then I think I went back and then played through Dark Souls 3 in 2018. Yeah, I think I think it was 2018 when I went back and played through Bloodborne and Dark Souls 3 completely. And the funny thing was, I'd forgot that I'd even bought Dark Souls 3. So like when I tried to buy it from the Sony store, it's like, this game is already in your inventory. I was like, what the hell? I don't remember doing this. So anyway, yeah, I came to the community pretty late, despite having played Dark Souls 1 as my first game, maybe relatively early, but probably later than like most for DS1 in who had that as their first game. And then I had another question in the chat. Oh yeah, no. Ponyboy said, no, not him. It was Pull. as long as you don't make money from it, Nintendo doesn't care. Some developers get burned because they get greedy. I think you're half right there. It's that Nintendo probably doesn't have a legal leg to stand on if people aren't making money from ripping them off, essentially. So I think like you're kind of right, but for like a different reason. Hey, Corey, nice to see you again. Yeah, I was in the middle of the ocean. I was on a float. I was on a boat. Jaglag says, it was a really strange experience playing DS1 through 3 in reverse. Yeah, that's part of the reason why I really hated Dark Souls 2 my first couple times playing it, because I went from Bloodborne to Dark Souls 2, and that is just like the polar opposite in terms of like the speed of the FromSoft games. Probably the only worst thing to do would be like playing Sekiro first.
Stands that the most important thing at the end of the day is the experience. I was hanging out with my boy Internet Pitstop while you were nerding out about the Dark Souls games when he brought a pretty interesting article to my attention. Miyazaki has had his works compared to the Zelda franchise numerous times, and they were such a huge inspiration for him when he was in school. When he was asked to comment on it, he goes on record saying that he thought his series wasn't even deserving to be mentioned in the same breath as Zelda. However, in that very same article, he makes the distinction that in Zelda games, you're often guided along an epic journey that's laid out before you as the player. But in Dark Souls, you get lost. And I can't think of a better way to describe this overall series. At the time, Dark Souls did something that no other games were doing upon release. That was A, shut the fuck up, and B, let the player get completely lost with minimal direction, allowing the player to be guided solely by their own curiosity. And it's reflected in every aspect of this game. Upon booting the game up for the first time, you might be surprised that regardless of its reputation, there's no emergency lights or bells or whistles or a waiver to sign away your rights to a safe word. Instead, you're greeted with some underwater ambience while you spend an hour customizing a character that you'll probably never see again in the game. The actual atmosphere of Dark Souls runs in stark contrast to its obnoxious reputation, giving it this kind of fairy tale, dreamlike, ketamine-filled aesthetic that runs through every corner of this game.
Oh shit. Who put this fent in my Estus? I'm so lit, I'm hearing the character creation music playing again.
Oh my god, was that like AI? Because if not, that was just a crazy accurate impression, whoever made that. So, hey Stella, nice to see you again. The Gabe, welcome back. And Jonah, nice to have you again.
It's a game that doesn't even have background music for half the time, letting you just bask in its atmosphere. Dark Souls is very quiet in its approach. Its deliberate lack of music entrusts the player to leave the world's interpretation solely to your discretion. A theme that runs through every vein of its gameplay, storytelling, and who gives a shit, why am I telling you this? Because in Dark
So this is going to be a weird comparison if anybody's like unfamiliar with this, but I think not having a soundtrack for the most part really heightens the experience of Dark Souls because it feels more cerebral. In many ways, it's more immersive because it feels like you get a better grip on the kind of world that's around you. Whether or not you're playing with like headphones and can hear the enemies, it's just like the music tends to be relaxing for a lot of games. So not getting that kind of reassurance in a game like Dark Souls really adds into the kind of tension and the stakes in many places. And the very few times the music does kick in, it's memorable. So when you have a boss fight happen, you're like, oh god, there's like music, this is stressful. It's like really high tempo for like what we were just doing before, kind of chilling in our own heads with like all these zombies at a very slow pace. And then when you get down to Ash Lake and you got the it's like, holy shit, this is something. I have no idea what this is, but this is huge. It's empty. I don't really see a lot of enemies. There's this choir. What is going on here? It's just extremely memorable because of that music. And the reason why I said this is going to be a bit of a weird comparison is that I think in many ways Dark Souls is kind of similar to the movie Deliverance, where you might have a certain expectation of what you're getting into before you see that movie, but then there's a lot of content that goes beyond like what you might expect, and Deliverance is very well punctuated by not having that kind of a stereotypical Hollywood soundtrack, and it's a very quiet, cerebral movie as well. So It definitely has a lot of tonal similarities to Dark Souls in certain ways. Jonah says, how do you at someone and make it highlight their name? You just at them. Literally. Jaglag was in awe when you heard the ambient music in Elden Ring. Yeah. So I do like a lot of the music in Elden Ring, but I do wish there was kind of more if they were going with that ambient approach, because it does tend to get a bit old and repetitive when you're trying to like fully explore an area. It was way worse on the original release of Elden Ring, because there was no night music except for like the default Limgrave night music, even in like Caelid and whatnot. The first time Necropolis made it to Ash Lake, you instantly turned around and said nope. Did you have to climb all the way back up the tree, or did you at least get that bonfire? Ding Dong doesn't like the menu music for Elden Ring? That's crazy. If Lord George was to make a last protagonist build in Elden Ring, what build would you run? You already know Gideon's armor? I mean, I don't know. Like, for me personally, I feel like my gameplay is probably a bit at odds with my kind of characterization on stream, I guess. Because I like to be melee and be kind of like masochistic and like to conquer adversity. So probably some kind of like generic ass knight, I guess, or a bit more like edgy and like Godslayer Greatsword and a little bit of Unga Bunga with some faith and spells to buff you. Be sure to set the language to Japanese for the item descriptions. Alright.
Dark Souls, you are rarely encouraged on how to feel, what to think, or what to make of anything in the world. Whenever you are told something, there's typically a counter to it that's right around the corner, resulting in your actions and experiences feeling far more authentic and genuine. This is probably one of the core elements that makes a Dark Souls game Dark Souls. The game treats you like an adult. It's allowing you to miss out on tons of great content and experience frustration. In exchange, you get to feel authentic reward and discovery whenever you do accomplish something in the game. Now the question remains how much frustration should actually be there to give you that authentic feeling of reward, because in this game it's a little bit off kilter. There are areas that don't feel like much trouble. There are things that feel so incredibly batshit retarded that why the f would they ever leave that in? No good game designer would put that there intentionally. Yeah, here it is. But despite some of its annoying runbacks and some
well, wasn't exactly expecting to still hear that stuff in 2024.
unrefined areas, the sheer volume and freedom afforded to the player means that you're the only thing holding yourself back. Aside from a few locked walls, the only thing that's restricting your discovery is your own perception and desire to explore. Because in Dark Souls, you're supposed to play in the out of bounds, the invisible walls are only there to help you explore further. Because in this game, if you can see it, you can probably go there. Thanks in no small part due to its work. Out of all of the Souls games, the original is the only title to feature a one-world open linear map design. For the most part. The entire world snakes through itself in a miasma of castles, forests, ruins, Jewish tunnels, and caves, all connected through secret passages that loop back around to previously found checkpoints. It's an impressive addition to the game world that gives you that feeling of, oh, I actually know where I am after not knowing where you are for 4 hours, only to go back out and forget again. But I never really gave that much of a shit about it. I still feel like it baits out a lot of misplaced praise for what actually makes the level design so fantastic. I've seen plenty of interconnected worlds done in many other games, and they're not talked about nearly as much as Dark Souls 1's, because at the end of the day, it matters what's in the game world itself that makes it noteworthy. I look at the interconnected worlds the same way I would like a nice glass or a fancy straw. It's a fun addition, but it all depends on what I'm drinking that's going to keep me slurping. In Dark Souls, the looping world isn't what's inspiring me to adventure. It's the dreamlike environments themselves and all the extra content hidden away in them. It's the fact that I can do things out of order. It's the fact that I can miss double-digit hours of content because I might have missed a hidden path behind not one, but 2 invisible walls, only to wind up at some of the coolest areas in the game. It's the fact that every corner of this world feels like a destination deliberately placed with intention, which rewards keen observation. It's the reason people see try jumping near a cliff surrounded by 10 bloodstains and still try jumping. Because sometimes try jumping gets you something. The world is constantly teasing you to think outside the box and test its own boundaries. There is a great satisfaction to finding those looping shortcuts, and the lack of loading screens does help immersion. But I don't see why that satisfaction can't be replaced with the portal or just an easier means of warping. And the lack of having the warp at the start of the game does rain on my parade a bit, knowing I still have to backtrack for 5 minutes, even with the shortcut unlocked. Some people say it encourages exploration, but I found the opposite to be true because I didn't want to get stuck resting at a bonfire that would force me to climb my way back out the way I came. Regardless of all that, the world design is still incredibly well thought out. Every step you take in this game makes you
Yeah, so that's a really interesting point that I kind of agree with to a certain extent there, that sometimes certain bonfires can feel more like noob traps than they have any right to be. I don't know if they addressed it in the remaster, but didn't they add a bonfire next to Vamos? Because if so, I feel like that has to be the most noob trap bonfire of them all if somebody is trying to go down the catacomb section of the map first. But anyway, yeah, just going back down to the catacombs is really rough for a brand new playthrough, especially because you get content gated by not having the Lord Vessel. I do wish that Lord Vessel wasn't a requirement to go down there and kick Nito's ass, because that would really open up a lot of the game for me. But I do think he has kind of a valid point with that.
You think twice about where you're going with intention. Okay, it's pretty well thought out. What's even more impressive though is that searching through the world you won't find just simple upgraded weapons with rare, epic, or legendary statuses as you progress. Instead, each fragment of armor, each sword, shield, and item come with a name and a story. Even the most mundane objects reveal something about the person carrying it, their true intentions, ulterior motives, offering insights about the area itself that tell the true story of what's really going on in this world. The best part is it allows one of the heaviest stories that exists in gaming to be completely non-intrusive, allowing me to just sit back and roleplay as an illiterate Neanderthal who's not too educated in the fine arts of delayed gratification. Thankfully, people much smarter than I have pieced the story together and are still working on it to this day, leaving me to just sit back to enjoy the game. Without going into super specifics, because I already know that you know how the Souls games work, except for like 2 of you. I'm Mom and Dad. I will say that all the mechanics of the Dark Souls games all exist within a vacuum outside of the others, with their own sets of rules and logic. Dark Souls 1 takes a slower, almost more cerebral approach, where player actions are much more of a long-term commitment in terms of time and stamina. Some of these windups come with like a 30-year mortgage. Unlike Dark Souls 3, shields actually work, armor actually matters, and spamming rolls would get you killed more often than not.
Yeah, the thing that I probably enjoyed about the mechanics the most of DS1 was poise really mattering, where like they kind of buffed it more in Elden Ring, but it just kind of played into the build of Dark Souls 1 a lot more meaningfully, I guess. I don't really know how to explain it beyond that point. And then, yeah, I don't know.
Dark Souls 3 is a dance, Dark Souls 1 is sumo wrestling. Where DS3 felt more rhythmic, rewarding player for their reaction time, the tempo of DS1 almost feels like turn-based in comparison. A player from each game will most likely hate—
Yeah, that's kind of how I also like to describe Dark Souls in comparison to some other games because of its slower nature. So Dark Souls 1 is definitely jankier, but it kind of like makes more sense in like the confines of itself in some ways than a game like Dark Souls 3 does, because Dark Souls 3 feels a lot more reaction time reliant, whereas he was saying a moment ago like DS1 is more cerebral because you really feel as though you need to find the spots, the times to pick your moment to strike, and you could do that a lot more tactically than you can in DS3. And then DS2 I just kind of like to ignore because I didn't really enjoy the melee of DS2 at all, but it's even slower than Dark Souls 1 somehow. Poise boys forever. Nemo misses poise, ignoring boss attacks while you spam heal is the funnest stuff ever. Yeah, so you can still do that somewhat with like the what's it called? The flask buff in Elden Ring and some other like super heavy armor, but it takes a lot more setup to do, which is a little bit unfortunate.
the combat of the other until they can get acclimated to it. Although DS1 probably offered the most in terms of variety in its combat of the trio. Since you weren't forced to just twink around rolling 24/7, doing things like two-handing your weapon as a strength build would massively increase your damage output. You can be a ninja just as much as you want to be a tank, which is something that wouldn't be rewarded as much in later games. That and the magic and pyromancy in the game was completely busted too, so you had a ton of different viable options to play this game however you wanted. Even though it feels clunky as shit, the fact that you can play this game completely out of order and with so many different player styles gave it a ton of replayability that the later games didn't offer as well since they were a little bit more clamped down on your exploration. One of the reasons the combat
I don't know how I feel about that. To be fair, I really haven't played Dark Souls 1 or 3 with any magic builds in mind. So for you guys in the chat who might actively play DS1 more, do you kind of feel similarly to what Manly here? Is that what he calls himself? Yeah, is Manly does in terms of finding that there's more build options in DS1. Maybe he's talking about the Dark Souls game specifically because I feel Elden Ring is just kind of like on a different level in terms of customizability, but I definitely felt like Dark Souls 3 had a lot of very viable options, so I don't know. All you need in Dark Souls 3 is the Cestus. Just spam the weapon art. It's always an option. Poise got reserved for ultra weapons and he never forgave them for it. Scaleezy. Alright.
in Dark Souls felt so satisfying though, and this is something that spans the entire series, is that general enemies take anywhere from about 2 to 5 hits to dispatch on average. On average. The difficulty of the game doesn't come from just artificial boosting of enemy health pools, but instead puts the onus of survival on your own skillmanship. Nothing in this game is outside of your ability to overcome it. However, the key thing though is that the game doesn't just make you improve on skill alone, you also have the means to improve your weapon quality and increase your levels, resulting in you outputting higher damage, requiring less inputs to take out enemies.
So Potato Poker says there's absolutely more variety in DS1. Yada says DS1 can feel more flexible at times just because you can get what you want quickly. Maybe you're right. Stella says the amount of out-of-order stuff you can do really relies on how good you are at clipping outside the map. Okay. Hey Nectary, nice to see you again. And Corporate Nothing, welcome back. Most of the spells in DS1 feel very similar since you have to stand still and cast. Ding Dong really got hooked with the alley with all the assassins. Nice.
Even just going from 4 hits to 3 hits feels massive over the course of these games, where a lot of other sword fighting games would diminish the experience by having you slowly chip away at enemy health bars. While I do love the combat of this game, it still feels quite dated compared to some of the later installments in the series. Boss fights, while grand in presentation, kind of fall flat, leaving much to be desired in terms of movesets. Outside of bosses, the game does throw a smorgasbord of frustrating level design mechanics where gravity seems to kind of pick and choose when to kill you. And once you feel like you have your feet under you, the game will just throw in like some rickety ass bridge to throw you off your tone. Like, what the fuck was that for? And previously, if you had brought any of this up to players at the time, you'd be stonewalled with the automatic get good, which would often act as a deflection against any sincere and valid criticism. Although I will say I do like the culture of just not allowing any excuses whatsoever, because there is still no shortage of people that will just complain of this game without getting better themselves. We've all been there. The reason I bring all this up though is that I recently convinced one of
So yeah, get good is slightly toxic, but I think in many ways it's kind of also a good motivator, because there's really no counter argument to get good, because it's like, if you disagree, then you're not good, you know? It's kind of like the old catch-22. So, as frustrating as and as janky as Dark Souls 1 can be, and as buggy as it can be, get good kind of trumps all, and by forcing players to get good, I think it can help them eventually see the beauty in the game and kind of get over all of those little hiccups that would definitely dissuade people from completing a lot of other games, I feel. Ding Dong says to him, just get good means stop spamming and pay attention. Scaleezy says, get good equals I'm too lazy to give you actual advice and instead I'm saying it's your fault. Well, are they wrong? And Pony says, get good is fine as long as you're not being a jerk about it. So yeah, that's another thing that's probably a big component and definitely worth addressing here. So I've kind of always taken "get good" as a bit of a snarky comment than anything like ever meant like extremely seriously or with like bad intentions. So I can only imagine how that vibe can change depending on the person saying it. Necropolis always took it as play the game and you'll learn. Yeah. Jay Dixon said most of the people in the community have been really helpful and positive, but you've heard otherwise for sure. Yeah, so I've kind of always taken that as a bit more of a fringe thing, like probably more indicative of people like around like the high school age where they might take that stuff a bit more seriously. Whereas I feel like definitely for my channel and the types of people that I hang out with, we're a bit older, so we don't take it that seriously when we say or hear things such as "get good." Clownscum says, real men say hesitation is defeat. Honestly, one of my favorite things about Sekiro is just if you go into like a random streamer's stream and they're playing the game for the first time, and if they ever die and somebody in the chat just says like hesitation is defeat, and they just like keep repeating that, and then the streamer finally gets to Ishin, and then the hesitation is defeat line comes out, and then just like the flashback of all the times they were told hesitation is defeat for the big reveal. It's just a kind of a special moment in gaming. Jesse R says, what advice do you give? Try to memorize boss moves, level more vigor. So yeah, like get good is kind of a catch-all. So there can be more pointed advice to give people at times for sure, but like get good really kind of covers all the bases there as long as they actually have like a decent stat spread for whatever build they're working with. Yeah, as Nectarine says, and is absolutely accurate, Souls fan culture was substantially more toxic 10 years ago. Agreed. You always forget about young people? Okay. Hesitation is defeat as a stacking dot confirmed. Alright. Yeah, Without Horns probably has some legitimately good advice where you typically want to roll in towards enemies rather than away. It's really good advice for most enemies in the games.
One of my good YouTube buddies to give Dark Souls 1 a try after he'd previously loved Elden Ring, Dark Souls 3, and enjoyed Sekiro above all the others. Yeah, I know, he's one of those guys. After I was watching him play for a bit, I started to get that same feeling of like whenever you show your good friend that really funny YouTube video, and it's been like 3 minutes and they haven't laughed yet, and you can start to feel your social credit being deducted. He absolutely hated the game, and I just kind of rolled my eyes and hit him with a couple get goods, because that's the same exact shit he said when he played Dark Souls 3 for the first time, and he ended up loving that. After all, the human brain will always try to rationalize and make excuses to justify emotions, regardless of accuracy. Except he kept on hating the game, at least in terms of the other Souls games that he's played, and he started to bring up some valid criticism that I happen to agree with. Like some of the backtracking, enemy placements, the unfinished second half of the game, some of the level design and unfair bullshit that's anti-player, the RNG factor, the lack of thrilling boss fights, etc, etc. It's easy to find flaws within every single corner of this game. It's far from perfect. But there's one thing that stood out to me as a testament to this game's core design, and it's the reason I still put it above so many others out there despite its flaws. No matter how much he was bitching to me and bemoaning all the problems with the game, and making me feel like a dumbass for even recommending it to him, he kept coming back to it, and he eventually beat it. And you don't do that shit to games you don't enjoy.
Meanwhile, me forcing myself through Dark Souls 2 so I could get footage for lore videos.
Or at least don't completely hate. I would like to talk far more about the actual mechanics of Dark Souls 1, but I'm actually going to be opening that can of worms when I talk about Dark Souls 2, which is going to be far more in-depth. I've been wanting to make that video even longer than this one. If you want to kindle the channel and get recognized in a video, your support on Patreon means the world to me, and I appreciate every single dollar you throw my way. There's also some extra tutorials and behind the scenes of how I even make these videos in the first place, if that's something that interests you. In the meantime, I've got Twitter, where I won't update you on anything that I'm doing, and I will see you later.
Alright, so this video is kind of weird because I enjoyed a lot of it, but then he just made some like weird ass jokes that were kind of tasteless, to be honest, and I don't really feel like they substantially added anything to the video, and they kind of ended up detracting. So I kind of don't feel like liking it because some of them were just like that distasteful to me in 2024. Now, with that being said, nah, I don't want to like try to defend it just because it's not like worth it. He seems young enough where he should like know better. He doesn't exactly seem like he's from a time where language is treated a bit differently. So it's just kind of like disappointing to me more than anything else there. So with that being said, I do think it was phenomenally edited. Definitely a lot of high production value, but I think I'm just gonna like stick with my guns and just not like it. Not that I think that's going to matter too much in the long run for this video. So that's just kind of where I'm at right now. So Quaylog was talking about how toxic Souls culture was 10 years ago. I think it's definitely mellowed out as its core audience has matured, and I feel like since the original DS1 fanboys have gotten older and whatnot, they've probably gatekept a lot of the culture following them as they've gotten older and just kind of like outgrown it and are kind of like done with that childish stuff. So I'm sure that there's still some shitheads out there, but definitely a lot more adults who are into the series now to kind of like keep it a bit more grounded. The Bartholomew trailer to give the perfect 2000s feel ending. So Dark Souls Bartholomew? "12 years ago." Okay. You agree? Totally fair. Thank you guys. Yushu, nice to see you again. Don't trash talk your favorite Dark Souls game. I'm sorry. But no, that's a lie. I'm not exactly sorry, but I can say my condolences and mean that. Yeah, so Sella says, you know people who said that kind of stuff in 2006 who absolutely wouldn't now, so you're not sure that being older would be an excuse. So like, that's kind of like my point. Like, I feel like not only is he like younger, so I feel like depending on like what kind of crowd you're going with, it can definitely influence the way you act, but yeah, I don't really feel like going down that rabbit hole. Thanks, Corporate. I appreciate that. There's still toxic Spirit Ash gatekeepers for Elden Ring, so has that died entirely? Are they actually toxic? Like, I don't interact with like that base of the community enough to know. I'm sure that there's going to be like individuals, but I kind of felt like it was more of a meme. Hey Shib, welcome back to the stream. Baffling so how so many people haven't developed basic empathy. I think some of it is probably just ignorance, but I mean, I don't know. And so like I definitely like way back in the day used language which we don't use pretty much nowadays, but that's just like times are different. So when I used stuff like that back then, it just I was saying it mindlessly. Like there's like no concept of like what those words actually meant in certain contexts. Like they didn't mean what they actually mean to me back then. So the connotations were just slightly different. So that's kind of like why I bring up the age thing, because you can see some wild stuff from like the early thousands, which was treated a lot more innocuously back then than it is now. Hey John, nice to see you again. I don't want to repeat it. It's not really worth it. All right, so let's check out the Dark Souls Bartholomew trailer. I don't believe I've ever seen this.
Oh my God, please help me.
Oh, the music, okay.
Trying to get clean. He says, wash your hands, get out the stains, but you best believe, boy, there's hell to pay. Yeah, you best believe, boy, there's hell to pay. Saying,
probably gonna get copyright struck if I, or not copyright struck, but like demonetized if I just like let it play all the way through. So I'm gonna talk a little bit. Make some transformative content, perhaps. So it seems like, are these all cutscenes? No, this isn't a cutscene. Wait, no, yeah, it is. Vamos does have a cutscene when you walk into him. Yeah, I was trying to see if they were just like using binoculars and HUDless or just all cutscenes. Wait, what is that? Alright, it's frozen. Okay, what is this? Maybe this is gameplay, okay. No, because it's frozen. Maybe that's like from a trailer. I wonder if they had like dev camera somehow.
Never broke a bone. My daughter get the kings on the throne, and I'm all alone.
That's the Kirk armor.
And the fire grows, and I'm all
Prepare to die. Most anticipated game of E3 2011. So, it is also kind of crazy that Dark Souls won the kind of ultimate game of all time award contest thing like a couple years ago, or last year, whatever it was. Because even though like I am a really big fan of Dark Souls 1, I don't know if I could call it the ultimate game of all time. Like there are some like massive shoulders that Dark Souls stood on to get like to where it is today, which, you know, I mean, this kind of true of every game that's released now, but I don't know what game I would give like the ultimate game of all time. Like in some ways I feel like Super Mario Brothers 3, like the original for Nintendo, might be that for me, but anyway, yeah, I don't know. Sent Shay back to time. Blackman said, this actually convinced you to play it. We talked about ugly graphics earlier, but you love the way it's portrayed here. Nice. Okay. Yeah, so this is filtered a bit more, so the game doesn't quite look like this, but I do strongly believe that the graphical style of like the art design really does help the world building of Dark Souls 1. And I think the world building of Dark Souls 1 is by and far the best of the series. And it just hits like none of the other games do. Even Elden Ring, I don't think really compares to the world building of DS1. Just that intro trailer alone is just peak. And so, what'd you guys say? Stella said there was a girl whose boyfriend told her she played the game wrong because she used Spear and Ashes and beat the game before him, so it's definitely there. So that sounds more like a toxic relationship, so that doesn't like invalidate that there's definitely toxic gamers, but yeah, just like if people in your personal life are doing that freaking sucks. I don't know, maybe I've just been on the internet long enough that I have like a thick enough layer of skin where I don't take a lot of these insults very seriously at all. Potato says Ocarina of Time might be your favorite. Alright, so that was pretty cool. Let's go back to our list of videos here. So next on the docket, we have Dualism, Death, Dung, Elden Ring Theory by Zach Magnus. He also has one on the Gloam-Eyed Queen that I thought about watching today, but I didn't want to double up Marika with the Gloam-Eyed Queen just because those are pretty heavy topics to follow each other. So I figured this one would be a good lead up into our Marika is the Gloam-Eyed Queen conclusion here. So
let's talk about.
All right, let me back it up, turn on subtitles as always, and away we go.
Let's talk about omens. Why are they like that? What can we learn from them about the lands between? Omens are graceless beings, most famously born covered in horns. Not only that, but they look rather different from normal humans, especially in that they're larger. Evil spirits haunt their nightmares, though perhaps that's a self-fulfilling prophecy based on their constant persecution. Some are able to conjure yellow-black flame. One famous omen is the demigod Mohg, Lord of Blood. If he's any indication, omens have special, fiery blood. His twin Morgott seems to echo this, trying and ultimately failing to keep his blood contained. We can also learn a lot from the lovely Dung Eater. While he doesn't seem to be an omen himself, he models his armor after a dehorned omen. He himself also uses yellow-black flame to fight, and his infamous seedbed curse sprouts little omen horns. Through this bodily defilement, he somehow causes souls to become cursed, incapable of returning to the Erdtree. Somewhat confusingly, he says these will nonetheless be reborn, and that this curse will continue to be inherited after.
Let me turn up the volume for you guys because this video seems a little bit quieter.
That. The heart of an omen without the body to match. Could there be any crueler existence? Just what is this telling us? It indicates that the Dung Eater has the spiritual aspects of an omen. Yellow-black flame projections are called wraiths and are said to be cursed spirits. Omens and the Dung Eater alike seem to be innately haunted by these. This may explain the nightmares. The phrase heart of an omen could even be taken literally. He has the actual heart and the blood that omens have. In addition to the psychic haunting of wraiths, fiery omen blood may cause constant physical torment. It may be something like ceaseless discharge. That's a Dark Souls character, in case someone's not aware. The Dung Eater's partially omen-like nature gives us a window into the body-soul dualism present throughout Elden Ring. It's most blatantly thrust into our faces with the duo of the bodiless Ranni and the soulless Godwyn. Actually, the D-Twins' armor description gives us a tantalizing hint of a tripartite distinction among body, soul, and mind. Fascinating though that is, for now I'll mostly stick to exploring the dualism of body and soul. A brief aside to help grasp the nature of souls. Information is an important concept in Elden Ring. Runes, for example, seem to be a form of information. Information isn't made of matter, like a body, but instead has a completely distinct nature from the physical. Souls are another non-physical entity, and souls are able to interact with information. For example, consider a Great Rune. A Great Rune, I believe, is a complex and detailed description of some concept or principle. It is an object in the realm of information. However, it can be attached to a soul. This isn't the same thing as being in the mind of the creature whose soul that is. You can have a Great Rune without mentally comprehending its principle. Otherwise, becoming a tarnished Elden Lord would require very high intelligence, which it certainly doesn't. However,
So far, I think this content's pretty good. I don't know if I would agree whether or not the rune gets imprinted on the soul or anything like that, although I don't really have any strong evidence to necessarily contradict such a statement. It's just, this has kind of been like one of the bigger problems that I've been trying to solve for a while with Elden Ring, but I don't really feel like we have the answer to really figure it out fully in whether or not runes and souls are intertwined, or if they are intertwined, like to what degree are they intertwined, and then like how separate are they? That's kind of hard to separate, because we do have like Godwyn's body dying and Godwyn's spirit dies and is destroyed, but Ranni's body, did I say that backwards? Ranni's body dies, Godwyn's spirit dies, and so I think there's a strong possibility that gold remains within Godwyn's body as well as all of the other soulless demigods, and that's why you can dupe remembrances, which are like gold related, but I don't know if that stuff is specifically tied to the soul, even though there is that kind of body/gold soul dichotomy at play with the individual, because we still have spirit ashes, and it's questionable like whether or not the spirit ashes have runes or memories or gold, or like how much all of that fits together. So that's just kind of like where my headspace is now for all that. Hey, howdy, how's it going? You gotta go to bed? Thanks for dropping in. All right, so Clown says, you think he's talking a bit too fast? It's a little hard to take stuff in. Okay, so I was having a little bit of difficulty following along, but that's because like my thoughts might have been a bit scattered to begin with. So maybe he is talking slightly quickly, which is part of like one of the difficulties of adjusting to YouTube and speaking to a more general audience, making sure that your audio levels are fine and that you're speaking slowly and enunciating things clearly without sounding too robotic. So maybe that's a bit of a constructive criticism for Zach here, I think. Zach Magnus. Okay. Eladelia says, seems like there's clearly a solid distinction between soul and whatever gives you personal memory and personality based on the D brothers. So that's like one of the weirder things, because the D brothers do have one soul. They technically aren't listed as saying that they have two minds in the Japanese, so it's two bodies, two wills, and one soul. And whoever seems to have the remote controller of the soul at the time can like operate their body, which is going to be important. But what exactly that interplay is between the soul and like runes specifically is just one of like the toughest problems for me to try to solve right now.
However, information alone has no effect on matter. When benediction is granted to a great rune, ultimately stemming from the greater will, the rune is allowed to be used to have physical effects. Now information is having an effect on the physical realm. A more intuitive example is life itself. Souls animate biological matter, acting as a bridge which allows the informational realm to affect the physical realm, and vice versa.
Alright, so I think I get what he's saying, but I do want to like back that up just to try to let it sink in a bit more, because I'm not entirely sure I agree, and I want to like gather my thoughts on that. So I'm going to back it up about 50 seconds or so.
Souls are another non-physical entity, and souls are able to interact with information. For example, consider a great rune. A great rune, I believe, is a complex and detailed description of some concept or principle. It is an object in the realm of information. However, it can be attached to a soul. This isn't the same thing as being in the mind of the creature whose soul that is. You can have a great rune without mentally comprehending its principle. Otherwise, becoming a tarnished Elden Lord would require very high intelligence, which it certainly doesn't. However, information alone...
I'm not sure I would agree with the premises here, which might make it difficult to continue to follow along with the rest of the video. Not like in a literal sense, but just like if I'm already having a disagreement here, I might misconstrue what he's trying to say later on, and I want to try to be cognizant of that, because I feel like I really need to think about this a bit more. Like, I might end up agreeing with him at some point, but I feel like there's some pretty major stuff here which just doesn't click the right way, either for me or maybe just like the arguments in general. And I'm struggling to find the threads to tie my argument together. So I'm kind of like at a loss of words right now. Hey Les, welcome to the stream. You just realized that Omens in game have 4 toes, but the people controlling the Lion's Dance thingies in the gameplay trailer have 5? That's an interesting thing. So I did notice that there's like this weird demi-human looking like thing in one of the promotional artworks, and it only has 4 toes. Let me pull it up for you guys. Is it... Here it is. It should be this one. I guess it's 4 fingers, not toes. Yeah, so I don't know what this thing is. It almost looks like a half troll, like half demi-human type thing, but it has red eyes. I guess I didn't notice that before. And this is just very interesting to me. Anyway, let me go back here. Potato says this video is gonna fly by you. I feel like the arguments here are pretty abstract, and if you don't agree or follow along to begin with, it might continue to get more confusing as we move along. Morgott does have 5. I guess I could like pull up the cutscenes and actually look. And Dev Chappelle, welcome back to the stream. Webbed hands, yeah, it's very, very different. Hey Summit, how's it going? Welcome to the stream.
It has no effect on matter. When benediction is granted to a great rune, ultimately stemming from the greater will, the rune is allowed to be used to have physical effects. Now information is having an effect on the physical realm. A more intuitive example is life itself. Souls animate biological matter, acting as a bridge which allows the informational realm to affect the physical realm, and vice versa. When anything puts a soul in contact with physical matter, I will refer to that as binding a soul. Biological life is a very common form of soul binding, but surely isn't the only one. In fact, life seems like a relatively orderly and complex binding. There are simpler ones, and some of these seem to manifest physically as forms of flame. Wraiths, for instance, are souls that are bound rather simply and chaotically in the form of yellow-black flame. Rancor is another similar example. Omens seem to innately perform this type of simplistic binding to wraith souls. I think it's involuntary. The spiritual aspect of omenhood is shared by the Dung Eater. What's the connection, if any, between the spiritual and physical aspects of being an omen? I believe the overarching theme explaining omens is the idea of uncontrolled growth. This explains their large size. They're best known by their horns, and horns are a body part which never stops growing for the entire lifetime of their owner.
So I kind of disagree with this part already, because we are shown of the omens who have their horns cut off, but we're not exactly shown any omen horns which seem to have like regrown, with potentially the exception of how one might view the seedbed curse, which the Dung Eater performs on those who he implants Omen horns into, but that I feel like we'll probably get into a bit more as the video moves along here. So, for what it's worth, when he's talking about the informational realm, I don't think he's saying that super literally as much as he is trying to illustrate a point. But I could be wrong there, and he might mean that like literally, that there's a kind of informational realm in which metaphysical concepts such as runes might reside. But I'm not sure that I'm on board with that, especially with that whole concept of runes lacking benediction. But maybe that's where he believes like the whole like soul binding things comes from. So maybe there's also informational binding. I guess we'll need to hear a bit more there. Hey, Meow Laser, welcome on in. So opens and their uncontrolled growth are a metaphor for capitalism. Yeah, the super rich Omen, indeed. Ship says, if Omen never stopped growing, wouldn't they be getting to God in corpse size? So I think that's kind of like a misattribution of what he's saying here with like the uncontrolled growth or uncontrollable, in that the Omens themselves, if they could probably choose, they might elect to not have the horns, but they can't control that aspect other than cutting them off, which isn't exactly controlling the growth as much as it is just trying to manage the growth, which I think is a little bit different, but nonetheless. All right, let's go back into it.
There's no full size at which they stop. The greater will doesn't like this. It only wants controlled, orderly growth. This is why omens are graceless. I speculate they aren't even supposed to survive gestation, but because Death and Death isn't in the Elden Ring, they reach birth and can grow up big and strong.
All right, I'm gonna double check that line there about being born graceless, because I feel like I have disagreements with that, but...
Growth. This explains their large size. They're best known by their horns, and horns are a body part which never stops growing for the entire lifetime of their owner.
Oh, so he's talking about like literal horns in real life here, I think.
There's no full size at which they stop. The greater will doesn't like this. It only wants controlled, orderly growth. This is why omens are graceless. I speculate...
So, I feel like the reason the omens might be born graceless could be because they potentially predate the Erdtree and the grace of gold that was brought with the Erdtree, but that's kind of maybe a bit beyond the topic of this video at hand, despite like me bringing it up right now. So I want to at least try to entertain the rest of his theory within the constraints of his own theory for now. Galamoth asks, does it say they're literally born with the horns? For the mother's sake, you'd hope they'd grow in later. No, I mean, that is pretty much the implication with the Omen Baron effigies, because let me pull them up. Alright, so let's magnify this for you guys. So, doll of a curse-born bairn, and bairn is like Welsh, I think, to just mean like child or infant. So uses FP to unleash wraiths that chase down foes. Omen babies have all their horns excised, causing most to perish. These fetishes are made to memorialize them. Quote, please don't hate me or curse me, please. So this quote here is probably not supposed to reflect the view of the baby as much as it is the mothers or like the parents who had such babies. And since they're worried about being cursed by their children, they're trying to create these kind of memorial statues so that way they could kind of like appease the dead children. And that's kind of something that's similar to what you would get in like Sekiro. So you have what are the Jizo statues? Do we have a good old Wikipedia just to be... So there's like a Buddhist monk who's known for like trying to provide like a lot of what's the word? Appeasement for children in the afterlife, and he's like one of the most like famous monk Buddhist figures in Japanese like history. And so there's like a bunch of like shrines that have little statues of infants to try to allow those infants to like pass through the afterlife without anguish, so that way they can, you know, have good afterlives, essentially, which I think is where the imagery of the Omen Baron effigies are drawing from. And so the Regal Omen Baron kind of builds off that. It says, doll of a curse-born Baron from the Erdtree's royal line here. So, yeah, it says very clearly that they were born cursed, even in English and Japanese. So they seem to have been born with the horns since they needed to be excised at birth, which causes many to die. So definitely sucks to be a curse-born baby, and it probably sucks quite a lot to be a mother of such a curse-born baby, by all means. Ponyboy says the informational realm and physical realm are a broader academic framework. I figure, but I'm just trying to parse it as it exists in relation to Elden Ring specifically, rather than trying to bring up a full different type of framework from reality for the most part. All right. Okay.
They aren't even supposed to survive gestation, but because destined death isn't in the Elden Ring, they reach birth and can grow up big and strong. Marika, probably accidentally, denied the Greater Will the ability to prune what sorts of people can exist. Just some speculation there. Uncontrolled growth applies not only to the body, but to soul binding.
Okay, that's interesting. So this was posted 6 days ago. I was wondering if this is posted before the first Shadow of the Erdtree trailer and the accompanying interviews, because Miyazaki had specified the lion dancers are from a pre-Erdtree civilization, and they kind of have omen horn iconography on the lion costume and potentially their bodies. So that could suggest that the omens may predate what's going on with the Erdtree and or the removal of destined death. So we might just have some really fundamental differences of opinion about how all of this ties together that I will try to keep in mind as we progress through this video here.
An organism normally builds up a physical means for binding a single soul to itself. One might argue that's the point of life, but an omen does this uncontrollably and doesn't bind only a single soul. In addition to a relatively normal human soul, they form many simple, chaotic bindings to wraith souls. They can learn to wield these as a weapon, but they're also constantly tormented by them. Marika can perhaps detect them emanating from the Dung Eater's phantom.
So I do kind of agree with this little assessment here to a degree, although I don't know if I would tie it into chaos specifically. There might be a method to the madness, but we will probably need the DLC to get the specifics of that, unfortunately.
May help make some sense of the Dung Eater's rather unique approach to identity. His phantom and physical forms act like two different people, similar but not identical. And then he tells you, "You are me." What must his subjective experience be like, constantly swarmed with chaotic cursed souls? Perhaps his consciousness shifts among them. He doesn't identify with any specific body, perspective, or line of thought. Instead, he identifies with the actions that he usually takes. So when he decides you need to do the defiling, he says, "You are him." Through defilement, the Dung Eater has found a way to spread this spiritual omen nature. I believe he causes his victims to suddenly bind cursed souls, and by proximity, this haunting corrupts the victim's own soul. The haunting also has the physical symptom of sprouting omen horns. It is interesting to compare and...
So yeah, I agree with some of this so far, and I really do think it's an interesting point to bring up the question of Dung Eater's identity in relation to this, because honestly, I feel as though I've probably glazed over that aspect of his character and really haven't given it too much thought. So I've got some preliminary thoughts percolating around my head right now as to that whole issue of Dung Eater saying that you're him and he's going to essentially become something else, but I want to let those thoughts foment a bit more.
Contrast with Moog, who also causes his followers to adopt his nature, though seemingly without such extreme effects. Vare is described as exceptional for taming Moog's omen blood and making it fit for sharing. Has the Dung Eater performed a similarly exceptional breakthrough? I have my doubts, and anyway, I don't think it's his blood that the Dung Eater injects his victims with. It does, however, demonstrate an interplay between body and soul. It's physical bodies that the Dung Eater defiles with pox, yet their souls end up cursed. So the body can affect the soul. These souls are cursed and unable to return to the Erdtree, but he says they'll be reborn, and also that their own children will be likewise cursed. I find this somewhat confusing because it leads me to ask, when a child is being born, does it pluck a soul from the ether somehow, or is a new one created, with some sort of guidance from its parents? The Dung Eater's claims seem to imply a mix of both. However, it's possible he's simply mistaken. It's just some claims he's making. How could he know whether some soul or another becomes reborn? And how does he know what his children will be like? Now,
so I think those are all really excellent questions, to be honest, and the way that I would try to reconcile that would be that we're shown from other systems like that of the regal ancestors that life, death, and rebirth exist as a cycle beyond the Erdtree, and that the Erdtree could be viewed as something which pervades the cycle and interrupts the most natural form of life, perhaps, to institute its own cycle of Erdtree burial and potential rebirth, depending on one's thoughts about Erdtree rebirth, which I know many people have very strong feelings about for different reasons. Without Horn says, turns out the Omen don't put the toilet seat back down. Man, where have you seen the toilets in Elden Ring? I haven't seen one. No wonder why they don't put it back down. Scowleasy says, if the Dung Eater is someone that defiles others, then we become the Dung Eater by defiling him. That's a strong possibility. I wonder if part of the reason why he would say that we're the Dung Eater and that he's something else could be because he is trying to become the Order itself through his mending rune, I guess, like through his vision. So I would agree with that kind of assessment that we kind of enact the role of Dung Eater, but I am also just kind of curious about that identity crisis that the Dung Eater is having, because I haven't really given too much thought to it. And hey, Happy Hep, welcome back to stream.
His mending rune does back up his claims, but that's a mending rune. Once it's part of the Elden Ring, sure, then it can radiate its effects out and change both the bodies and souls of many beings for generations to come. Apparently the Dung Eater had some inkling that he could achieve the creation of this mending rune, so I think he was just confused in his claims for this reason. He thinks individually defiling people creates a heritable curse, but maybe it doesn't, it just curses that one soul. Only once his efforts change the Elden Ring does this truly become a multi-generational effect. At least, it makes a lot more sense to me to look at it that way. The mending rune is created by defiling the Dung Eater himself with many of his own accursed poxes. I believe the effect of this is to repeatedly increase the amount of chaotic soul binding happening in and around his body. When an extreme quantity of these cursed souls are all interacting with each other within him, they coalesce into the mending rune of the fell curse. I don't think mending runes and great runes are fundamentally all that different. In the far future, a mending rune might even become a new great rune if the Elden Ring is shattered again.
So I'm glad that he kind of shared that perspective. I'm not entirely sure on my feelings about the mending runes. I tend to agree with this, but I could definitely see why other people might feel as though mending runes are not like great runes themselves. Nonetheless, I feel like the mending rune of the Fell Curse might have one of the most profound effects on the Lands Between, which if it does have such a profound effect, I can't really imagine it being too different from a great rune after all. And then, Summit always took the Dung Eater's mission to be that of slowly infecting the pool of souls in general, regardless of whether his mending rune is incorporated within the Elden Ring. I agree with you, and I feel like once he kind of gets stopped and realizes that he could probably interact with the Order itself, that he might have like this more grandiose plan to enact what he's working towards. Hey Chadwick, welcome back to stream.
So, like a great rune, a mending rune is a detailed description of some principle, and souls are informational entities. So a great concentration of souls, each bearing information, all on the same topic, all in one place, forms into this mending rune. Presumably all mending runes work something like this. That would mean that Goldmask creates a mending rune just using his galaxy brain, with just one soul, by building up such a voluminous and detailed model of reality using his own mind. The amount of coherent information required is the same in both cases, but Goldmask and the Dung Eater gather it in very different ways. Then what about the mending rune of the Death Prince? And more relevantly, what of this yellow-black wraith flame, which I've been associating with omens? Various adherents of Godwyn use magic and effects which have that same fiery yellow-black appearance. There's gotta be more to this story, hasn't there? Where else does this kind of effect show up? The term wraith comes from the wraith calling bell used by Revenant worshippers. These worshippers have this effect around them when they appear. The Revenants themselves teleport around at will. Other teleporters are the headless guardians of walking mausolea. Some of these have that same flame effect on their weapons. These headless soldiers are protecting headless demigods. Soulless, in fact, just like Godwin. These await the eclipse, and the center for all things eclipse is Castle Sol. This castle enshrines the eclipse shuttle, whose weapon skill, Death Flare, of course has the same visual effect. In fact, its description directly describes it as the prince.
So, I don't think he made this claim, but I was wondering if anybody in the chat may have gotten the impression that he may have implied that the Wandering Mausoleum soldiers might be soulless, but that is kind of contradicted in the Spirit Ashes for Lutel, since it is a Spirit Ash, and for all intents and purposes, I don't think there's meant to be a difference between a soul and a spirit as far as Elden Ring goes, until we get more evidence to, confirm or deny such claims. Wait, did Blackman say something? Okay. When the Dung Eater says, "You are me," it could be an almost meta fourth wall breaking jab. I've wondered about that as well, but I feel like that might be too on the nose. All right, Mr. Yada, you have a good night, and thanks for dropping in as always. Hope we'll catch you on the next one. Take care. All right, so let's go back.
These have that same flame effect on their weapons. These headless soldiers are protecting headless demigods. Soulless, in fact, just like Godwin.
Okay, so yeah, I'm pretty sure the soulless is meant to refer to the demigods and not necessarily the preceding clause.
These await the eclipse, and the center for all things eclipse is Castle Sol. This castle enshrines the eclipse shuttle, whose weapon skill, Death Flare, of course has the same visual effect. In fact, its description directly describes it as the Prince of Death's flames, practically confirming a deep connection to Godwin. How do all these various entities interrelate? How do omens ever enter this picture? One thing both the Wraith Calling Bell and the omen-like Seedbed Curse agree on is the idea of cursed souls. I once again consider the concept of dualism. Souls can bind to living matter. Death is when the soul becomes unbound. This could happen in various ways. A presumably common one is that the physical means of binding loses its function. In other words, the body breaks down and can no longer hold a soul. This is one way for death to happen. But other ways seem possible too. What if a soul somehow changes and loses the ability to be bound, at least in the normal way? If that happened, the soul would unbind, and that would also cause death, but by entirely different means than killing the body. I believe this is what was meant by killing the soul. Godwin's soul became corrupted, cursed. It lost the ability to bind normally to physical flesh, while that flesh itself was relatively unharmed. So it went on living, though its soul departed it. So Godwin's soul became a gigantic cursed soul, much like a wraith.
So I would kind of disagree with this, because the impression that I get is that Godwin's soul is literally destroyed, but I'm going to definitely hear out the rest of his theory here. All right, let's go ahead and do that. That's annoying. Okay.
Soul isn't manifesting anywhere in anything like a complete binding, but if it did, it might look just like a giant yellow-black flame. Godwin's various adherents and associates are able to commune with his soul. That's why their magic takes on this.
Are you kidding? What the? Alright, dealing with the spam bots.
The same familiar appearance. These are things like Mausoleum Soldier Auras, or Deathblight, or Fortisax. I'm not saying Godwin originated this, that it didn't exist before his soul became cursed. His cursed soul is just a huge example of the type of effect, which has existed as long as omens have, and possibly quite a bit longer than that. Revenants are another example. Who knows how long they've been around? They seem to be some super esoteric, carrion means of undeath. The resulting being is quite powerful. However, the method is completely incompatible with the Golden Order. They're actually harmed by healing spells. I guess the Erdtree's healing pushes bodies toward rejecting these souls it considers cursed. Maybe there were many more of these revenants around before the Erdtree was shining down over everything.
So I've got some thoughts about that, but I will wait to share them. I'm going to actually open up my notes so that way I can remember to do so, and I need to clear out the old ones. I always forget to do that, apparently. All right. Revenant Bro, what the hell is up with this bot? I've banned it like 3 times already. Yo, if you guys are in the chat, will you go ahead and like report them? Maybe that'll make it go away faster. Alright, so I got distracted. So Revenants, Curses, and Healing. There was something else that I want to touch on. Just kind of like maybe the Omen curse in general. Okay, this might be good.
The full story is even more complicated still. After all, Godwin is the source of Deathroot, which creates those who live in death. But those who live in death show no sign of the Prince of Death's flame. Instead, they seem to use a different thing called Ghost Flame. Ghost Flame is heavily associated with the Deathbirds of old. Yet Mausoleum Knights, seemingly connected to Godwin, also explicitly evoke the Deathbirds in the design of their armor. On the surface, it seems things aren't lining up well. Those who live in death don't seem to use the right form of magic, and even if there are 2 forms, then which of them did the Deathbirds use? But once again, dualism helps explain it all. It makes perfect sense that effects stemming from Godwin's soul use cursed yellow-black flame, while effects stemming from his body instead result in pale ghost flame. Godwin's soul and body are on 2 very different wavelengths. That's the unique thing about him. As for the Deathbirds, the common connection there demonstrates that, back in their heyday, the Deathbirds ministered over all aspects of death. They dealt with both body and soul. So their influence remains relevant no matter which aspect of death you're dealing with, even in the modern day. Still,
I'm going to need to think about that a bit more. Trying to tie Ghost Flame specifically to the body is interesting. Because I wonder how my guy feels about the Ghost Flame torch, which burned bodies, but seems to emit skulls from it. Now I kind of want to double check the scaling for the Omen Baron stuff, as well as like the Ghost Flame spells and like Health and Steeple. Because I thought they were... like they scaled the same way, both off of intelligence and faith, but there might be something a little bit more to this that I haven't explored. Omen Barons are also in faith. Are they a flat in faith, or are they weighted a bit differently? Necropolis, welcome in. Oh, you've been here for a while. Was Ghost Flame a different color before? So it's arguable because the English translation of the Grey Violet says that Ghost Flame was the hue of, or Grey Violets were the hue of Ghost Flame, but that's is kind of more of a localization thing. The Japanese just says it's the flower of Ghost Flame, which is quite different and doesn't say anything about the color more specifically. So some people think that Ghost Flame could have been purple, and maybe that was changed when Destined Death was removed from the ring, but we don't really know. But the Japanese doesn't say anything about color, so I tend to lead towards maybe not. Galamoth asks, why are there Ranker skull-looking things on the Wandering Mausoleum feet? So some people have wondered whether or not the Rancor things could correspond to the soldiers which guard the mausoleums, but we don't really know, because apparently like keeping the ghosts or the skulls alive animates the Wandering Mausoleums, but we don't really have an explicit answer as to how that really works. And yeah, Without Horns assumes the skulls on the mausoleums are the skulls of the Headless Knights. Spirit Flame is the Godfroy of Flames. It's a little bit different, but yeah. Yeah, and as Korn says, in 1.0, Malekith's weapons also had a purplish color to its special attacks. All of those attacks were parryable with the Blasphemous Claw and have been changed to a golden color in the final version of the game.
Still though, what's the deal with all the headlessness? The Guardians are headless, and so are the demigods. Even the horses are. I think the purpose is to achieve an irregular soul binding, different from the usual kind. Here's a difficult question. Precisely which part of the body binds the soul? We can't know, but it's pretty intuitive that it might be the head. That is where the brains normally are. Thematically, there's some backing too. Eyes are obviously right there in the head, and they're huge windows to the soul in Elden Ring. Head hair, too, has a lot of significance, possibly caused by its proximity to souls.
So I like this train of thought, but one example which might poke a hole in this theory so far would be that Lutel, the headless Mausoleum Knight soldier, is headless, and she exists as a spirit ash. So, I mean, to be fair, like, Lutel existing as a spirit ash is super annoying to begin with, because, like, wasn't Lutel already a spirit, but now, like, her spirit was burned, and it's just so annoyingly wonky. I don't even know what to make of it. And then Summit thinks the souls of the skulls have been bound to the mausoleums, which is what allows it to animate. Yeah, it's a really popular idea. Alright.
Even when they're in dilapidated statue mode, Marika and Radigan still have their signature hair, perhaps for this same reason. Note also how Marika's busted head needs to be put back on for the Elden Ring to appear, which makes sense if the Elden Ring is attached to her soul, and her soul is bound by her head. So what is the point of the beheading ritual? It leaves a maximum of flesh, which cannot bind a soul in the normal way. The resulting body is missing just that piece. Maybe a so-called cursed soul, which normally can't bind a body, can then take residence. If it does so, it seems to grant teleportation powers, which is always helpful. The case of Lutel seems to support this. She seems to have undergone at least 3 different death rituals. Her head was removed and her body successfully bound by a cursed soul, giving it teleportation and Prince of Death's flame powers. The head, meanwhile, was presumably Erdtree buried. That would still return her soul to the Erdtree, which seems like it would be the main point of that particular ritual.
So I would disagree with the head part, because the spirit ashes are supposed to have returned to the Erdtree if one believes in Ronnie's dialogue in that spirit ashes are ashes that have been unreturned to the Erdtree. Although I think this is a pretty ingenious way of trying to settle that kind of discrepancy. So he kind of seemed to like make 2 contradictory claims that the soul resides in the head a moment ago, but now he's making a different claim that a cursed soul can potentially be bound to the body. So maybe that kind of works out in his worldview after all, but I'm just kind of left a little bit puzzled. I don't know how you guys in chat feel about that, though. I don't know too much about the color of purple with death, but yeah, there's definitely the stuff with like the wisteria leaves and kind of being a way to ward off the afterlife, I suppose. And y'all are talking about the Shiri Kodama, I assume, since you're talking about Dung Eater, although I missed the context there. Oh, okay, yeah, the Dung Eater has a different idea of where the soul is. Okay, I see what you're saying. Alright.
This does mean that these headless soldiers are not exactly possessed by their own original souls. But the significance of this is unclear, since apparently the mind is not merely a part of the soul. So why are these demigods beheaded? Could it be related to what may be a stray Godwyn head found underneath Stormveil Castle? No, I think that's a different story entirely. The demigods in the Mausolea are headless for the same reason their guardians are. It seems that demigods are somewhat different from normal people in some fundamental way. A demigod's flesh is special, and so is their soul. That means the point of the headless demigods is to bind a cursed demigod soul. It's to bind the soul of Godwyn, give it flesh once again.
So I think this would contradict the text that these things have had their souls destroyed because they're soulless, and so I don't think it's fair to say that a soulless demigod just has a cursed soul, but I mean, that's just a difference of opinion here in the perspectives.
His demigod soul can't bind to just anyone's headless body, it has to be a demigod body. A common cursed soul easily binds to a normal person's headless body, if the right ritual is used. Cursed demigod souls, by contrast, are quite rare, so a fair number of these demigod bodies are scattered throughout the lands between, not binding anything. Considering the close ties between souls and information, perhaps it's appropriate that an intended receptacle for a demigod's soul can be used to make a copy of the remembrance of a great being. I also wonder whether this particular coffin design is more than decorative. There's a suggestive crown-like piece right where the head should be. Does it relate to trying to attract a soul? I've seen similar designs in a few places. Deep in Elphael, and Mikla is of course heavily involved in the Godwyn Eclipse plan. They're also in Raya Lucaria, and sorcerers have a history of all kinds of exotic soul bindings. Revenants...
Yeah, I'm glad he was able to point out the other places the coffins appeared, because it's always just nice having that level of attention to detail. One thing that I'm kind of wondering in relation to this cursed soul idea is how Zach Magnus thinks like destined death fits into this equation to kind of create these soulless bodies to begin with, and then where the introduction of such curses would fall in line with that. Because I feel like it's one thing to make a claim about the Omen being their own thing and like having curses, because the curses seem somewhat native to them, but then I don't think he really established why the soulless demigods are cursed more specifically here, other than that they can be, I guess. I don't know. Summit says, this could be how he bridges the gap between this and the Dung Eater's connections to souls. That is, cursed souls are cursed by having the source of their binding being moved into the body and not the head. So, I think there is more to that, and I want to get to it, but I also want to see if he touches back on that point before I go off on a tangent here. Ponyboy asks a completely out-of-pocket question about what do I think about the implication of a sorcerer's glintstone blade, primal glintstone blade, being their soul, and what that means to Ranni, who presumably didn't transfer hers. That's a very good question. I really don't have a strong opinion on the way that Ranni performed her ritual, because it does seem quite distinct from other things, because she like imprinted her soul on a literal puppet as opposed to like a hollowed out person who will act as a puppet for her. So, right, I don't know.
These are just one of many examples, but I'm just grasping at straws here. Anyway, despite all that, Godwin's soul never did come back. It supposedly requires an eclipse. Apparently, that hasn't panned out. By the way, this is just speculation, but if the headless troops are at all analogous, then maybe their creation requires a lunar eclipse rather than a solar eclipse. Those could be much more common. But what's gone wrong? Castle Sol is the nexus of this eclipse ritual. Interestingly, Castle Sol has these so-called spectral soldiers who look just like the headless ones, except they do have heads. They can still teleport around, too. So it seems like a more advanced version. Castle Sol is cutting edge. Achieving this may have required...
You also have the teleporting banished knights appearing in the hero's grave right outside, or like right in the first step, like the place you first wake up in after dying in the Chapel of Anticipation, or Precipice of Anticipation.
Required torturing a bunch of Albinorics, though. Well, blood may be the medium through which these cursed souls are bound. Blood certainly has many magical applications in the lands between. The Omen twins both obsess over their own fiery blood. And one infamous thing about Albinorics is their strange silver blood, and how they manage to be alive despite that. So there is a certain logic to using them to create a new sort of soul binding. So that may be a sort of...
I'm not so sure about this claim. The case of the Albinorics is interesting, and there might be a kind of through line between the way that the Omen are described as being graceless and the way that this says that they're untouched by grace, although it is posed as more of like a theoretical type situation than something completely literal. So they might have some grace, and you might be able to make the argument that since Albinorics have runes, they probably do have like some gold or grace to some degree, if not like, you know, not the guidance of grace, but I want to think about that more.
Success story, but the eclipse itself was a failure. Why is this? I don't have a firm answer yet. Instead, let me share a grab bag of thoughts. One thought that occurs is that an eclipse requires something to occlude the sun, typically a moon. So maybe Lunar Princess Ranni intervened. After all, if the point of the eclipse is to bring a demigod soul back to the lands between, maybe Ranni's Dark Moon participated in the eclipse, but instead brought her soul back, and that's how she came to be bound to a doll body. If so, then she screwed Godwin twice over. She got his soul evicted, and then prevented it from coming back. But I don't know, that doesn't relate too cleanly to the mechanics of a cursed soul.
So there's a bunch of stuff that ties into the eclipse and draining the sun of color to keep destined death at bay, which might be relevant. And so if something gets drained, it could metaphorically tie into the way that the tarnished have been drained of gold. There's some consistency in the Japanese and the terminology for that. And the term for the way that things get eaten through by curses and the term that's used for eclipse tends to use the same character in Japanese, mushibamu or shoku, for that. So I'll go ahead and like post, or not post this in chat, but pull up the G show for you guys. Where's my... Okay, I'm just blind. Let me type it in here. Okay. So this character right here is Mushibamu. I'll bring it up for you guys. It means to be worm-eaten or to be eaten by worms. But when it's given like the Chinese reading and is kind of used in compound words, it's read as Shoku and is meant more in terms of the eclipse. But can also tie back to a more simplified version, which could mean like food. So like the sun gets eaten by the moon. I guess we don't really have it. So let's just do like eclipse for you guys, and it should probably show up pretty closely here. What am I doing? So Nishoku. So like the sun is eaten. Do we have like the older form? Okay, no. Interesting. Oh well. So the eclipse stuff is potentially related to being like hollowed out, drained of color, which might tie into things. So I do think there's a strong possibility that Godwin's gold might still be in his body, potentially the same with all the other soulless demigods, because if the soul isn't entirely related to gold, then if the soul gets destroyed, then that gold might remain. And I think that might be why we can dupe remembrances more specifically. But I guess Shoku can stand on its own. Oh well, it's not too important. And then like one of the other things is like the Curse of Godwin and Deathroot does say to like eat like through things through the Mushibamu sense. So you get that in the leathered shield, the weathered leather shield, or marred leather shield, and like the dagger, I guess. Anyway, what point was I even making with that? I'm losing my mind. Yeah, and D-Rock says somber smithing stones are also drained of color. Oh, yeah, the draining of color. So that is also at play potentially in like the tarnished golden sunflowers. So if you can eclipse the sun and drain it of gold, maybe that will allow the gold to finally leave Godwin's body, because the tarnished have been drained of gold, but they're brought back by grace somehow. I don't exactly know the mechanics of that, but that's kind of like the big point that I wanted to make with like the eclipse. So maybe draining the eclipse is kind of symbolic of draining Godwin, the golden of his gold, or color, or whatever you want to call it. Gold on a microplastic level, potentially worse. Give it to everyone equally. Galamoth wonders if it's the same eclipse Dracula sealed in. Okay. Game of Thrones did it. Alright, let's go back to the video. I'm gonna back it up briefly.
But instead brought her soul back, and that's how she came to be bound to a doll body. If so, then she screwed Godwin twice over. She got his soul evicted, and then prevented it from coming back. But I don't know, that doesn't relate too cleanly to the mechanics of a cursed soul. And the disappointed ghost in Castle Sol says the sun wasn't swallowed at all, so it sounds like there was no eclipse. Furthermore, supposedly what the eclipse does is ward off destined death. That doesn't sound that related to Ronnie's soul. It does sound somewhat related to Godwin's soul. It's a pretty strange line though. Destined death is largely sealed. It doesn't really need to be warded off. Maybe this whole concept is an old Sun Realm ritual from the ancient time before even the Golden Order, when
So maybe death is more physically related to gold if draining something of color keeps destined death at bay. This is a crackpot theory. I don't like really fully buy into it right now. I'm just kind of like thinking it through out loud. So I was just thinking like how it's kind of strange that Ronnie and the Karian's fates are held at bay, and that kind of keeps them pseudo immortal, with like Selen and Radon potentially halting the flow of the stars. So maybe there's different avenues to immortality in Elden Ring. Maybe there's like the spiritual immortality. I guess that would make sense. Hold on, let me try to think about this. So Ronnie died in body, which could potentially be gold. Godwin died in spirit, which might be star stuff. The Karian's fates specifically, not necessarily the Golden Lineage's fates, are held in stasis by Radahn. So Ronnie may have used destined death to destroy the body, but that doesn't explain the Godwin situation because his body's still there. But could Godwin have been touched by grace and then therefore immortal? So are these two competing forms of immortality, but Ronnie just gets the upper hand by being soul aligned? Like I said, I don't really believe that. I'm just like trying to think that stuff out for you guys here. Summit Streams thinks that what Marika is doing in the story trailer is merging and linking the power of the sun with those golden threads that make the Elden Ring, and Eclipse might depower that golden thread, preventing a rebinding. So we are told in the Warming Stones that at one time the Erdtree did shine as warmly and gently as the sun, but it is a little bit unclear whether or not that time was the pre-shattering time or just like the very beginning of the Order, like during the Age of Abundance with Godfrey. I tend to believe that it would have been more towards Godfrey's time because none of the Golden Order fundamentalist incantations like heal the Tarnished or anything like that. The closest thing you get is just removing all of the status effects and like Deathblight with the one anti-Deathblight spell and potentially like the Law of Regression, but nothing to actively heal the player. So I don't know how I feel about that. But certainly, it does seem like the sun's power did get kind of co-opted into the Erdtree to some degree. And then Buster says the fate of the Erdtree and the moon were intertwined. You're correct, but there is still the oddity of how Radahn can allegedly still affect everything, despite the Erdtree commanding the fate in the stars at this point, which is really tough to try to like figure out. Yeah, as Scowleezy says, it was definitely grossly incandescent. Blackman says, Vow of the Indomitable makes you literally invincible. Only for a brief period of time. You wouldn't want to fight the Erdtree champions. I mean, they get chumped by some nerds and they can't win. They had to cheat. Alright.
And death was more of an everyday concern, so maybe it was always doomed to fail in the modern day. But Mikola seems quite invested in this Eclipse plan, and given his supposed level of insight, it's hard to believe he would fundamentally misunderstand the current nature of the Elden Ring. I think he would know that an old ritual like that is not applicable anymore. Another idea is that, thanks to Radahn, celestial bodies aren't processing as they once did. That could prevent eclipses. But again, I think Mikola would be smart enough to observe this fact and not wait around for an eclipse that just wasn't going to come. But maybe Radahn only began to hold back the stars in the middle of this plan. Now that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, I think the last one might be relevant, although I'm not sure because it sounds like Radahn would have conquered the fate in the stars when he was young, but nonetheless, since we potentially need to kill Radahn to even access the DLC, I do think that really raises the question a lot more than just like leaving it here, perhaps.
That even explains why Melania later went all the way down to Caelid and fought Radahn. Maybe Mikola really wanted the stars unstuck. Well, as I said, I'm not at all firm on that, it's just vague ideation. Anyway, this is supposed to be about omens. Omens are supposed to be portents. Just what do omens portend? They bring cursed souls out into the open when they might otherwise be very obscure. Have they been a prediction about the state Godwin would end up in this entire time? They could be, but I'm not so sure. I don't think they're so specific. They'd be relevant even if nothing major ever went wrong. No shattering, no Night of Black Knives, maybe even if the Age of Plenty had continued forever. Nonetheless, apparently there are some souls that are said to be cursed, which just exit the system and then remain outside of it. Over time, these would accumulate, even if there were no big catastrophes like a demigod soul becoming cursed. The accumulation would eventually become an important situation which has to be addressed. I think this is what omens portend. The cursed souls are there, and they don't fit into the system, but you're gonna have to deal with them eventually. Perhaps Godwin and his mending rune could be a release valve to that situation. Or would it? I really haven't said how I think the mending rune of the Death Prince was formed, nor just what effect it would have. Death in the Lands Between is such an enormously multifaceted topic. I've barely touched on those who live in death, as well as the Deathbirds and their ancient rituals and bygone significance, but I've laid out some interesting tools here and applied them to some parts of the lore. I bet they'll continue to pay dividends as I investigate further along these lines and others.
Alright, so that was a bit of an abrupt end, but that's not a big deal. So, despite you having some disagreements with it, I did really enjoy this video. I thought I had some really thought-provoking questions, so I'm definitely going to share it with you guys here. If you want to go ahead and give Zach Magnus a like and whatnot. So, a little bit of constructive criticism maybe to slow down the pace at which our guy reads, and then maybe add in a couple more pauses in between thoughts through the editing process, and that might help break up parts of the video to let people digest the information. So, right, leaving that stuff aside, I did have a couple notes that I put at the bottom of my screen here, and talking about the Revenant's curses and healing, talking about the Omen curse in general, and then, yeah, I guess I still don't really have a lot of concrete thoughts about whether or not the Ghost Flame is related to bodies or the Wraiths are related to heads and souls, but nonetheless, the way that I tend to view the curses in Elden Ring is that paradoxically, although they're very, very much so aligned with death, I would probably argue that they're some form of life due to what we get in the Baldecan blessings description. So, the favor allows one to forget any aches and pains. In death, there's only peace, for in death there can be no sensation. So, if we take this line here at face value that there is no sensation in death, then I would try to make the argument that curses aren't fully dead because they are filled with torment and anguish to some degree, which is why they're curses. And that's kind of corroborated in the family heads. Or is it familiar heads? Okay, family heads. No, familial rancor, that's what it is. Familial... Alright, so familial rancor says, the anguish of a spouse and children invites accursed wrath. And I don't really think that's different from the Japanese. Yeah, anguish is pretty good for it. Yeah, it's definitely close enough. So, curses in FromSoft games tend to eat other forms of life, and they're drawn to life because they're alive, and that's a pretty big theme for like Dark Souls 1 and a lot of the stuff relating to the deep in Dark Souls 3. And I think that kind of ideology gets extended into Elden Ring as far as the Wraiths are concerned. And I want to think more about the Albinaurics connections to curses and whatnot, because we know Rykard was trying to torture the Albinaurics, but we don't know exactly why. It is my headcanon that Rykard was working with the aspects of torture to create an environment in which people are suffering, and such suffering would keep them bound to the world when they died with their souls. And that anguish is one method for doing that. And I think the same principle applies with everything relating to the Omen, because the Omens are afflicted by those curses at like in their youth. So, you know, they're just kind of born cursed. But part of the reason why people are terrified of the Omens is that their curses can infect others and cause their souls to get cursed and not return to the Erdtree because they aren't exactly dying. And I think it's for this reason that the Omen killers... Probably it's Rallo's description, isn't it? Yeah, so, okay, I think I need to look at Rallo. So, Spirit of Rallo, known as the first Omen killer. Once a famous perfumer, Rallo imbibed a physic to rid himself of emotion, thus enabling him to enact his nightmarish labor hunting the Omen. So I think Rallo's frame of mind here was that if he doesn't feel anguish from the curses of killing the Omen, then he wouldn't necessarily have his soul get cursed by the Omen, which would allow him to act with impunity in cutting the Omen down. So that's kind of one big idea that I have about the Omen and curses in general. Hey, Necropolis? No, I've not watched Zeif's video on Radahn yet. I only watched the one video just yesterday by him, which is pretty good. And Amin says, this is really similar to Humanity in the Dark. Yeah, I do think there is a bit of similarities there. Potato Poker, the golden centipedes don't only show up around churches with Radagon statues. You can find some in Noxtella. You can find some in Schiefer River. When you first go down in through the Mistwood, there's going to be a couple in the ruins by all the Bubble Boys, which you first encounter when you head to Schiefer River and like toward that side of Grace and the Regal Ancestor Part 1. I'm surprised there's no perfumer NPC. It would have been an insight into omens and curses. Oh, you mean like an actual NPC? I'm like, there's Theralina, or I guess she's not a perfumer. There's what's her name? I want to say Teresa, but that doesn't sound right. But nonetheless, not an actual NPC. Perfumers and omen killers are Ding Dong's favorites, especially since they're so reminiscent of the Nox. Perfumer would be an interesting starting class, yeah. Hi Sky Yumi, welcome into the stream. Given the framing and dialogue in the recent trailer, was it implied that Saint Trina is directly related to Mikola giving up his fate? That is potentially the implication, but it could also just be a misdirection, or just who knows exactly why they framed the trailer that way. But based on what we have now, I think that's a very comfortable assumption to make. So there's another perfumer other than Carmon, because Carmon is the like the crazed one. I can't remember her name, but it's another lady. And so like the weird thing about that perfumer lady is you can fight Trisha. You can fight her before getting spirit ashes of her. What the hell is going on with that fight? Perfumer Trisha. Trisha was once known as a healer who dedicated her efforts to treating misbegotten, omen, and all those seen as impure. When her efforts failed, she was their companion as they died, watching over them to ensure that they could pass peacefully, free of pain. Oh, yeah, I'm so glad that that we kind of like got back into this point. So I take Perfumer Trisha's thing here is kind of like a really big point of evidence to what I'm talking about with like the whole aspect of the Baldecan blessings and pain and curses in general. And then the final line about Perfumer Trisha with trying to make everything pass peacefully free of pain is that it's a tale akin to the origins of deathbed companions. So essentially, I think Rykard was torturing the Albinorix and pretty much everything he could to try to strengthen his cursed spirits, which could like exist within magma. But that, of course, is a bit of headcanon and just ties into the other bits of info that we know about curses from like Dark Souls, more specifically. Eldon says, doesn't an item description imply Trina suddenly disappeared, meaning Trina was already around when Mikola was? So I would disagree that with the characterization of that. It's just that Trina popped in and out of dreams before like people really understood what was going on. I don't really think it implies the kidnapping thing at all. Oh, you're wondering why they only show up in the Radagon churches and not the American churches for the Golden Centipede. You should have clarified. I think it's just to tie in the concept of the Golden Order more specifically to Radagon than Marika. Although I'm sure a lot of people in the chat are going to hate that I said that. No, you Galamoth. All right. Ponyboy saw a really interesting read of that where it was much darker. Essentially that Trisha was trying to treat them by macabre medical practices and then being there when they died because, well, okay. So that might be an interpretation of that, but I think the more macabre version of that would be in the white surgeons of like Vares type, when they would stab people before they could become too anguished, potentially to become cursed themselves. So I think this is a big theme within Elden Ring that's mostly subtextual, and you just kind of like need to read between the lines to pick it up, perhaps. Without Horn says, aren't centipedes like taboo in Japanese culture? I mean, I wouldn't call them like a taboo, but they're kind of like a pest and a creepy crawly. It's not too different from like the West. But nonetheless, they can be seen as being representative of death and stagnation. And Ella Delia brings up an interesting comment in that, considering the centipede infestation situation going on in the Senpo Temple of Sekiro, you could probably twist the centipedes into being evidence that Radagon has infested Marika, like one of those. I like that. It's kind of funny. And D-Rock says, centipedes have one of the most painful bites of any insect. That might be true. Although I wonder if that's like not necessarily relative to size, because I know like a lot of ants can kind of outcompete centipedes, but maybe, you know, just relative to size. Summit says, if sleep is related to death, could Mikola have renounced his fate in order to create the Saint Trina identity and talk to Godwyn after the failure of the eclipse? I think like the failure of being able to put Godwyn to rest might kind of contradict that a little bit, because I don't know. So I never really thought of the Saint Trina identity as being significantly different from the base form of Mikola. I would just have assumed that was always his dream avatar, but I guess it is unclear technically if and or when that Saint Trina identity arose. So the reason I'm a little bit skeptical is because of like the golden epitaph and the ghosts of Castle Soul saying like Mikola's plans have like continued to fail. So because like Mikola's plans continue to fail, it seems like it's because there's been no contact, I guess. Centipedes aren't insects, they're arthropods. Very well. Yeah. They're bugs. Arthropods aren't technically bugs, I think. Anyway. Okay, I think I know about that YouTube dude. Maybe I didn't know that he said the Mexican giant centipede was the most painful thing he ever experienced. Okay. Alright, so yeah. I talked about the curses with the omens. I feel like I made a lot of the points pretty clear there. Oh yeah, and so the omen curse in general, I think that the omens are born cursed, and the curses, for whatever reason, reside within their horns. Maybe because it just represents extraneous life to the base organism. And I think Dung Eater takes the horns and implants them into living beings, so that way they get tormented by these wraith accursed spirits, and they will become wraiths themselves because they're in anguish, and they're terrified of all this stuff. And part of the reason why I think Dung Eater does this to victims while they're still alive is because that's essentially what happens to Blackguard at the end of his quest. He says he doesn't want to die like that way, and then Dung Eater doesn't come up after the fact, like after Blackguard dies, to implant the seedbed curse. It's already there. So that's kind of like my thoughts on how that omen curse interacts with people and prevents their souls from returning to the Erdtree. So I'm still curious why exactly they're graceless, and it might just be because omens might predate the Erdtree. But okay, yeah, maybe that's about it for this part of the stream, and we can go into that next video. I still want to think more about the Ghost Flame to body connection specifically, because I don't like fully buy it, which is perfectly fine, but I'm willing to be convinced with like some more compelling thoughts to follow that. So like I said, I'm going to go ahead and link this again for you guys in the chat if you want to give Zach Magnus a like and whatnots. All right, so we've got a little bit of time left in the stream. I'm going to go a little bit over, probably a lot bit over, if we discuss this next video by the Emerald Gecko of Marika is the Gloam-eyed Queen. So strap in, chat, because I know there's a lot of disagreement about this topic. I've definitely got some certain ideas about this, and I've shared them before in the past, so I'll just try to keep my mouth shut a little bit as we dive on into this next one.
Ever since the shadow...
Is this super quiet for you guys? It's super quiet for me. Maybe I just turned my own volume down. No.
Ever since the Shadow of the Erdtree story...
Oh god. Okay. So this video is super quiet. I cannot seem to boost my volume anymore. Hold on. Maybe there's a filter I can apply to this after the fact. Okay. I'm going to try to add a gain to my desktop audio. So maybe this will be a bit louder for you guys. And then I'll try to remember to turn this the hell down later. So if it gets crispity crackly, I apologize. Alright, here we go.
Ever since the Shadow of the Erdtree story trailer dropped, everyone has had their panties absolutely sodden with the amount of information that's been given to us. But I think there's a really important detail that everyone seems to be overlooking.
Alright, yeah, this is still super low for me and it looks really low. I'm going to bump it up even higher for you guys. So this might be a little bit rough. Alright, I'm going like 7 decibels higher, so this should be significant. So you guys will probably end up being able to hear it better than I am at this point. Alright, so I'm going to back it up and let me know if this is still too low or too loud for you guys.
Ever since the Shadow of the Erdtree story trailer dropped, everyone has had their panties absolutely sodden with the amount of information that's been given to us. But I think there's a really important detail that everyone seems to be overlooking. There are actually so many little homages to the Gloam-eyed Queen and the Godskin nobles within this trailer. And from what I've seen, it's gone completely under the radar. And after throwing some ideas around back and forth with an amazing theorist inside the Discord called Stolas, I think I have a good understanding and idea of what might actually be happening inside the Land of Shadows to do with the Gloam-eyed Queen. So please, sit back, relax, grab some juicy succulent prawns if you want, and enjoy as we delve into the Gloam-eyed Queen's involvement inside the DLC story trailer. By the way, I do just want to say my throat is really phlegmy, so it sounds a bit hoarse or a bit rough. I really am sorry. FromSoft are key at subtle storytelling, and this trailer is no exception. The start of the trailer draws our attention to the numerous corpses which litter our screen, so much so that we almost forget that the sky is Gloam coloured. And who just so happens to be standing in view as we see this Gloam-eyed sky? Well, none other than Marika the Eternal. Buckle your britches, bitches, because I am going to give you a batshit insane theory that I have heard quite a few times, and I am a big fan of, and I do believe to be the case.
Yeah, I feel like this is pretty weak evidence, but I'll let it slide for now, I guess. No, I kind of hate it. Nonetheless, I mean, I pointed that out myself, and I was like, oh, maybe this is supposed to be representative of the Gloam-eyed Queen, but there could have also been the potential that the Gloam-eyed Queen could have been the thing from which Marika was pulling our threads o' gold.
I believe that the Gloam-eyed Queen is Marika. For a really long time, we've always thought the Gloam-eyed Queen was something of a child of Marika, but I think the theory that Marika is actually the Gloam-eyed Queen makes a lot more sense. It's my theory that the Gloam-eyed Queen was this alter ego of Marika before the creation of the Elden Ring. We know that the Gloam-eyed Queen was an Empyrean, and we know that Marika is a god. Now, what do we know about Empyreans and gods? Well, Empyrean is normally the form before becoming a full-fledged god. Would it be so far-fetched to think that the Gloam-eyed Queen is an Empyrean alter ego of Marika? If you need more proof about their connections, let's talk about something I'm definitely going to butcher the name of. The Godskin Swaddlings. This item is weird as shit. It's basically got these little infant-like faces.
So this video is like really strangely saturated. I wonder if like this was done in post or if it was just like the quality of the footage that my man's was getting. It's just kind of standing out to me.
Faces surrounded and embroidered with gold. Now this is really important because the Gloam-eyed Queen actually makes these. These are what she uses to wrap her followers she supposedly creates in as they are infants. Now it seems like, considering the similarities between the Godskin robes and this, that these sort of patches actually grow with the Godskin nobles. Now this is really interesting because of the gold. Colour plays a really big role in Elden Ring, and every single colour has their own little assigned roles. And I don't think this is any coincidence that the outline of these patches are actually gold.
So even though I have floated the idea that Marika's the Gek before, I find this kind of argument really weak. And this is kind of one of the things that's bothered me even with like floating this argument, is that if Marika was the Gek, then why had she seemingly given up on the apostles and the nobles? Like, why does she still not continue to swaddle infants in godskin if she was the Gloamite Queen? Maybe one could argue that the Gloamite Queen is to Marika what Radagon is to Marika, and it's just a completely different alter ego that could have gotten got and is no longer around, and that could be why this is no longer the case. But I do think it deserves addressing nonetheless. Amin is personally gloamed. And so, yeah, I know Ratatosker hates when people bring up Gloam as a color, but he can suffer. Shib spaced out. Is there reason everything is red? Too much tint one direction on the footage. I don't know. Hey, C, welcome on into the stream. You've been thinking about Radagon being a seamster plus the Godskins clothing. Yeah, you also have like the peeler and like kind of like the needle going on with the Godskin stuff. So, especially with Marika potentially pulling out literal threads in the story trailer, a lot of people have like really started to catch on that this might be a bigger theme than we all could have imagined to begin with. Hey, Cuchillo 2000, welcome into the stream. Meow Laser says, maybe the Gloamite Queen was killed and cleansed and became Radagon. It's a possibility, perhaps. We'll have to see.
Another connection to Marika lies in the fact that the bodies surrounding her, which she's walking up these fleshy steps, are actually flayed. This sort of flaying looks almost identical what we'd imagine the Godskin hunts to look like. A spirit in the Windmill Village says how the people of the Windmill Village flayed and skinned the people they killed and gave them as offerings to the Godskin nobles. I think that it's really weird that Marika is walking through piles and piles and piles of these skinned corpses.
So I like this kind of idea here. I'm really skeptical about it because there's multiple ways that this could be explained that doesn't necessarily mean that Marika is the Gloamite Queen herself. So for the sake of the argument, say that the little figure which she pulled the things from is not the Gloamite Queen. It could still be the kind of like last raid boss for the expansion here, and Marika could have defeated them, and like all of this could have been like the raid boss's arena, and so all of this set dressing could have been affiliated with the big bad beforehand, which Marika and her forces may have defeated, whether that be the Gloamite Queen or not. Hey IR Shade, welcome back to the stream. Nemo says, a real issue is the Gloamite Queen being Marika and Marika being Radagon is just that it's so narratively redundant. Yeah, we know some characters come in twos, but anything more to that would end up being ridiculous. So I don't necessarily make the claim because I think like it's a cool provocative claim. The reason why I think there might be the possibility that Marika could be the Gloamite Queen legitimately here would be that I think that more evidence points to the Rune of Death being removed from the Elden Ring after the time of Godfrey, like towards the end of the Age of Abundance or towards the beginning of Radagon's ascension to Elden Lord. And because of that, I think it would cause me to re-examine what the Rune of Death means to the Elden Ring. So if the Rune of Death exists up until the end of Godfrey's reign, and if Marika is supposed to control the ring during this time, and the Rune of Death is something that the Gloamite Queen is associated with, how do we reconcile these two positions? Could the Gloamite Queen have been like a literal child of Marika? That is one possible explanation. That could be in well agreement with the idea that Melina could have been the Gloamite Queen. Or it could also be the fact that since Marika controlled the ring, she could have potentially controlled the Rune of Death. Then does that necessarily imply that she could have been the Gloamite Queen? Maybe, potentially. So I try to like work from the bottom up for why I think the two could be connected, because that's kind of like the basis for why I think this theory could work, even if it is like really, really messy and trying to cram too many identities into like one individual being, and I kind of really hate that. So I'm not a fan of this theory, even if I think it's got a strong likelihood of resolving a lot of the problems with the timeline of Elden Ring for many situations. But of course, my interpretation of the timeline is very different than probably most people, to be fair here. I didn't see how Ratatosker got mad when Godfrey was mentioned. I did catch his reaction video to the trailer, and he had Crunchy in the chat, and they were talking about Godfrey because Crunchy said he's like working on an hour-long video for Godfrey. So it's just kind of funny to see like where our proclivities lie as content creators about what facets of the lore we enjoy and other ones we get irrationally angry at. And then Ella Delia says she thinks that Marika's interest in an age glistening with life does set up room to think she could have had a death-focused twin, but they should have foreshadowed it better if so. So, I really think Elden Ring screwed the pooch when it was fully introduced that Radagon was Marika, or vice versa, because that just really opened up that can of worms that you couldn't let the cat back in the bag at that point, where pretty much any one individual's identity would be questionable. Although I guess to be fair, even without the American Radagon thing, we have Dam, Shabriri, and Hayata, and potentially Gowri to contend with all of that stuff. And Summit brings up an excellent point in that we have tripartite gods and a certain very prominent religion in real life, so it's not unheard of. Very well. The nutty Empyrean instead of the nutty professor. I get you there, Happy. Ponyboy says, to be fair, they also hate that they have to consider Godfrey in the lore. House of Redwine says, Commanders Niall and O'Neill make them more angry than Godfrey. I feel like that may be more of a mechanical complaint than a lore one, perhaps, but maybe I'm wrong. Alright, gonna go back to the video for a bit and then bounce off you guys in the chat again.
Now I'm going to tell you something that was brought to my attention really recently. In the item description where it talks about the Gloamite Queen's defeat, it doesn't say killed, it says defeated. Now FromSoft is really picky with their wording, and I don't think this is a coincidence. The Gloamite Queen was defeated, not killed. Malekith could have easily killed the Gloamite Queen, but he didn't. Why did he do that? Well, going off the theory that the Gloamite Queen is Marika, Malekith is the sworn brother of Marika, like how Blade is with Rannig, considering his whole purpose in...
Oh man, with that accent, I was not expecting to hear Blade with a hard D instead of Blythe. Yeah. That's not too important. But Emily, welcome back to stream. Remember that Trina means triple if that hasn't already come up in the streams. I did know that, but no, I don't think I've really brought it up in the streams at all. I guess I don't really talk about Saint Trina a ton, except in the context of Mikola as opposed to the triple thing, because I think there's some theory relating to Trina and triplets, but I haven't really delved into that too much myself. The subtitles are going wild. That's what you get when you don't like have a script input in there, so it's just like done by the AI. And let's be real here, the AI tends to prefer like North American accents, so people who don't have that kind of standard Midwest news style accent tend to get some more wild results than others.
In life is to protect Marika. Would it be so far-fetched to think that maybe he found some sort of loophole in actually having to kill Marika and the Gloamite Queen for betraying the Greater Will? And I do believe it's the Greater Will they betrayed, because it is said that the Gloamite Queen was chosen to be an Empyrean by the Fingers, who are servants of the Greater Will. We know that the power of the Gloamite Queen and the Godskin Apostles and Nobles was sealed away after being destroyed by Malekith the Blackblade. I believe this is how he got out of actually having to kill Marika and the Gloamite Queen. He instead sealed away their power, ultimately destroying what kind of influence they could have had. This...
So I do agree with the assessment that the terminology used for defeat does not necessarily have to imply kill. So I definitely agree with that. And to kind of build upon this point further, Malekith may have only defeated the Gloam-eyed Queen, if that is truly indeed Marika, perhaps because he went bail after Marika, as the Gloam-eyed Queen, could have tried to perform an act of treachery against the Greater Will. I've wondered whether or not the Gloam-eyed Queen would have had any connection to like the Fingerslayer blade, but I mean, you guys have just as much lore on that as I do, so I really don't feel like much more can be said on that front. So anyway, could going bail and Iji's knowledge of it have been because of something that went awry with Marika and Malekith in the past? Perhaps. I think that's a very good possibility, although there may have been other Empyreans we don't know about for Iji to have obtained that information.
This would then leave open a space for another alter ego to form, and I really do believe this alter ego that formed was Radagon. In the DLC story trailer, when she's walking up these steps and the Gloam sky is gloaming, she reaches into something that looks like a... Everyone has been saying that from the top of their lungs since the trailer dropped, but I'm going to drop a little nefarious action, but a tomfoolery that I think is a lot more likely. Have any of you noticed that we've never actually seen the Elden Beast in a physical form? We've only ever seen the Elden Beast in a spiritual form in this sort of Erdtree realm that occurs once Radagon is pulled underneath the water. The Elden Beast crashed down into the lands between, and with it, inside it, came the Elden Ring. Don't you think it's a bit strange that in the story trailer, Marika reaches into this thing and pulls out what looks like little strands of gold, which can actually be seen inside the Elden Beast in the Elden Beast boss fight. Elden Ring is no stranger to physical forms being absolutely annihilated, the best example of which being Rani. I think that this weird thing that everyone thinks is a bit of pussy is actually the Elden Beast's real physical corpse that crashed down into the lands between. Something that adds even more to this theory is the fact that a few scenes later, Marika holds up these golden strands and the Elden Beast's theme literally plays along with a shockwave. Now, a lot of people have said that this is the beginning of the Golden Order, and I agree, but I don't think it's the exact beginning. I believe this is after the Elden Ring was actually created. I've had this theory for a really long time. The lands between the Land of Shadows were originally one. This is due to the similar architecture and the fact that some locations from the original gameplay trailer can sort of be seen inside the lands between, or at least really similar representations. A person in my Discord also realised that some of the buildings inside the city that Mesmer is burning down is identical to the ones inside of Lindale, almost like a twin city. It genuinely feels like they've just cut the world in half. One's the Land of Shadows, one's the lands between. And the fact that there seems to be some kind of portal, or perhaps a doorway, which honestly I'm more leaning towards, it genuinely looks like a tree made out of corpses, and we do know that the Erdtree, its roots are corpses. I genuinely think that...
So it sounds like we've got a bunch of X's for doubt in the chat. It's all good, guys. Buster says, maybe the trick Marika played on Malekith is sending him to Farum Azula to protect Destined Death, but also so he can stop her from shattering the Elden Ring. That is definitely something I've floated in a stream like the other night, I think it was, as one way to explain how Malekith could have felt betrayed by Marika. Because he does say, like, why goal me, why shatter? So it does seem as though there's a kind of causal connection between the way Malekith felt betrayed specifically there. Alright. Oops. Alright.
That this is after the creation of the Elden Ring and the splitting of the Shadow Realm and the lands between.
I closed my other window, sorry.
Now, though, is, well, if the Elden Ring is already created at this point, what is happening? Well, I think Marika is reaching into the Elden Beast's corpse and taking the last little bits of grace inside it and, well, using it as an offering. What, an offering for what, you might be wondering? I think this is the exact moment that Radagon is born. This is further reinforced when the narrator says, and two was Shadow born. Now, if the Shadow Realm is already born, as we see inside this trailer, What else could it be talking about? Well, it seems to be Radagon.
So, while Radagon is a strong possibility, and some people do wonder whether or not Marika's kind of masculine features in that moment are more indicative of the beginnings of Radagon, as well as the sudden twining of some of her hair to become that of a braid. Another interpretation of shadow there could be the quote-unquote forbidden shadow plucked from the Elden Ring upon the creation of the Golden Order. So that could be talking about like destined death more specifically, along with gold, I guess. But, you know, we don't really have enough information to really flesh out those kind of details there. And I thought there was something else that I wanted to mention in tandem with all that, but I am drawing a blank. So let's check out chat. Hey MK, welcome on in. Do I have any speculations about the Red Dancer from trailer 1? That's a good question. I have wondered whether or not the story of the Blue Fairy was just a story and a misattribution of what actually happened, which isn't completely off base for the FromSoft games, because there's kind of something similar to that in Dark Souls 1 with the chosen undead doing a lot of heroic deeds in the past, and then our heroic deeds gets kind of pawned off on another character named Artorias, if anybody's unfamiliar with that. So that could be what happened with that Red Dancer, but it could be something else entirely. And the fact that it seems to have Sacred Relic Blade-esque curved swords is very fascinating to me. So I don't really have advanced thoughts about that. I'm just kind of like waiting and seeing. But good question. Hey Lucid, nice to see you again. Summit says, if the trailer was from the Crucible era, presumably, the pregnant lady had the first birth, you think Marika's pulling hallowed golden locks from the first birth. And then Urshade asks, do you think there's any tie for Shadowbound Beasts in the Land of Shadows, or just more coincidence? I'm not sure. I think that really depends on what the Shadowlands are. I've definitely wondered if there's that connection between Malekith and Blythe and the so-called Shadow of the Erdtree. And that might be where like they're given form, but I really don't know. You think the Black Flame monks use a strangely fluid sword style? Is it really just the Black Flame monks, or do the Fire monks do it too? Although, I guess Fire monks don't actually use that Black Flame style sword, like the really cool looking curved one, which is kind of underwhelming when you actually get it. But yeah. House of the Red Wine always thought shadow meant how the skies looked in the trailer, golden shadow. Potentially. Okay. So the reason why I was thinking about the fire monks is because I believe you loot the Black Flame sword off of a fire monk, technically. Or if not, there is just like the one Black Flame monk in the one catacomb which drops it. It's super annoying trying to farm it. Hey Starling, nice to see you. Alright, let me back up the video a little bit here.
And 2 was Shadowborn. Now, if the Shadow Realm is already born, as we see inside this trailer, what else could it be talking about? Well, it seems to be Radagon. Not to mention, it talks as if this shadow is a person and not a place. Not to mention, as she starts to do this offering, her body starts to change into that of Radagon, something that hadn't happened previously in the trailer. Another connection lies in the...
Yeah, so some people might feel differently about this. I'm just kind of on the fence, because Marika is pretty muscular for a woman, and I've definitely seen a lot of women do pull-ups, and they tend to look more masculine while they are in this kind of pose specifically. But other people think that since she's shirtless here, this is kind of more indicative of being more like in the Radagon situation, which I think is kind of a fair assessment here. So for what it's worth, the hair still kind of seems to stay gold, but maybe they're just in the middle of that transition between Marika to Radagon. So I I don't know, because like she also does still have like the Marika jewelry, whereas Radagon is not depicted with this kind of jewelry in his paintings, I believe, but I think it'll just come up to individual interpretation. And Chadwick said, unless this is Mikola. Yeah, this is when Marika becomes Mikola. Don't you know? And Ponyboy agrees with the shirtless stuff. Yeah, and so some people think that if this is Marika, you should be able to see like the outline of her breasts, but I mean, I don't think this is like very anatomically correct with like the shading. I feel like it's not angled enough that you could potentially not see it, but nonetheless, like the torso is definitely very masculine. Summit's not sold, but not against it. Yeah, that's kind of where I am myself. This is Peggy 16 side boobs already? Yeah, Stella says not necessarily at that angle.
The fact that these sort of dusk traits seem to be passed down to some of Marika's children. The best example being Melina and Mikola. Now with Melina, you've got her dusk gloam-eyed eye in the final cutscene of the Frenzied Flame ending. And with Mikola, well, you've got Saint Trina. Has anyone ever wondered that the sort of dusk colour palette and the lavender of Saint Trina and Mikola is very, very similar? Is this a coincidence? Well, considering FromSoftware's past, I would really highly doubt that this is a coincidence. And I'm sure that in the DLC we'll get some kind of confirmation that Saint Trina is somehow connected to the gloam-eyed queen alter ego of Marika. Hell, maybe that's the reason why they strayed away from Marika.
So I think that's a very bold claim. I would be hesitant to make such claims myself.
Maybe this gloam-eyed queen...
And also, Aina, I saw you earlier, forgot to say hello. My fault. Welcome back to stream. Glad that you could catch me in the morning.
Persona whispered into Mikola's ear, and well, this is the result. Him betraying his mother. In the same way that the formless mother did to Moog. What I next wanted to talk about is what inspired this video to begin with, and for me to look into the gloam-eyed queen's involvement inside the DLC. And that has to do with this person, lying on the ground. What really intrigued me about this person was their weapon. Now this weapon possesses this spiral sort of pattern. Now this is mainly seen in Godskin apostles, nobles and the gloam-eyed queen. All of their weaponry have this exact patterning. I don't think it's any coincidence that this person in this trailer holds this patterning. Not to mention we literally see so many gloam-eyed queen references as we've just talked about for the last 9 minutes. This character is kneeling down in the rubble of what looks like the city that Mesmer is burning. This gives the impression that this character and the gloam-eyed queen are on the opposite side of Mesmer and Marika as they're burning down this city. This has so many bloody implications. This would mean...
Ooh, I heard the dog barking in the background. So yeah, I really don't have strong feelings about this. I mean, this is just a silhouette. It's fun to speculate, but I can only like stomach so much of it. Maybe this is definitely feminine. Maybe there's like more hair coming off the front side of it, but oh well.
There was a divide between Marika and the gloam-eyed queen, the two alter egos fighting against each other, just like how Radagon and Marika fight against each other to repair and destroy, respectively, the Elden Ring. I did just want to mention it, I'm not sure what significance this has, but at the impenetrable thorns in the Golden Capital, there is actually signs that it's been burnt previously, and it got me thinking, oh well, we know about there being a cardinal sin, but how did they come up with the idea that it was a cardinal sin? Well, my answer to that is I think it had happened before. I think the Erdtree had been attempted to burn a long time ago. Maybe the remnants of the gloam-eyed queen's forces after her defeat and the creation of the Golden Order came back and tried this assault on the Golden Order, and that was where it came from. That's just a theory, but I think that might be what's going on here. But again, Gecko's batshit insane theories, so please don't take this as 100% fact. Now, I actually don't think the...
So, thinking about stuff with like an original Erdtree and it being burned down, I guess one possibility that I never really considered was maybe perhaps all this reference to a crucible and an original Erdtree isn't just like an original form of the Erdtree. No, maybe there's actually a literal other Erdtree and not just like the whole like Great Tree thing. Because I kind of always took the Great Tree as being analogous to an Erdtree, but not literally an Erdtree. So maybe that could kind of clear up some of my thoughts on the matter, which I'm sure like some people are in chat are probably just like face palming right now about like this idea of Erdtree. And just to kind of like defend myself a little bit, it would just be because we're told that the birth of the Erdtree is done in the war with the fire giants, essentially, but that doesn't necessarily mean that was the birth of the first Erdtree, I suppose. So I might just like think about this a bit more, which would definitely suck, but whatever. Even if there is the case of another Erdtree, like literal Erdtree predating the Erdtree of Marika and Godfrey, it would still annoy the hell out of me because of the way that it's portrayed as being like a world-altering event, as though it should have been the first of its kind, with Marika saying for the age of the Erdtree, if there already was an Erdtree at some point, and the way that all of the Crucible Knights and ancient Erdtree stuff is affiliated with Godfrey more specifically, rather than an age before Godfrey. But it's super annoying.
Gloam-eyed Queen is physically partaking in this war effort where her followers are fighting against Mesmer, because she seems to be locked away, as this is the Land of Shadows, and if the Land of Shadows are present, then the Lands Between is also present. I genuinely think that these are the remnants of her forces after the battle with Malekith, and they're fighting the good fight in the name of the Gloam-eyed Queen, who basically practically raised all of her followers, as we know from multiple item descriptions. Although I do just want to say this is speculation. We're going to have to wait to the DLC for definitive proof, but I think this is a really big possibility as to what is going on here.
So yeah, I definitely appreciate Gecko's pointing out that this stuff is speculation and he's not trying to draw this directly like from the text or use very factual language when it's clearly just kind of like headcanon for now. So this is such a good clip. Pepe, I'm combining your two names, that Tarnished Archaeologist sold them on there being a first burning with the piles of ash in our first visit to Leyndell. So I definitely think that the Erdtree was probably burned at one point before, but now this kind of like ties into the question of, was there like a literal Erdtree before that? Is that an Erdtree that got burned down, or is it currently our known version of the Erdtree that could have been burned in the past? Those are the kind of questions which arise, I think, in relation to all this. MK asks, if you remove red from purple, you get gold, right? Are the colors really literal? I don't know, because like there's like the color theory as it pertains to like pigments, and there's also color theory of light, which might complicate things because most of the time it seems to be more related to the color theory as it relates to like pigmentation versus light, although I have my doubts at sometimes with some things, but generally speaking, I tend to think color theory for games is a bit oversimplified because there isn't always like a one-size-fit-all for every color. And I know like Hawkshaw has a color theory video on his channel. I actually reacted to that one on stream a long time ago, and I had like a lot of disagreements with that. Partially because so many colors kind of ended up overlapping. So with that being said, maybe Hawkshaw's interpretations were flawed and there might be a better system out there, but I still kind of remain skeptical so far. And Blackman said a friend of theirs thought that the ashes we see in Leyndell were from the Dragon War. So yeah, I think that's another very popular theory. I know Moxie Watts has the idea that perhaps the Erdtree could have burned from being struck by lightning by Grantax, which could also potentially explain the hollowing split within the middle of it, which I think is a really neat theory. I don't really know how I feel about that, but I also don't really have like super concrete thoughts on that first alleged burning to begin with. And yes, Pony, some of the thorns on the Erdtree are exactly reminiscent of the ones in Stormvale. i.e. not likes the tree burning idea, mostly because of how super Lucifer coded Mesmer is. They're thinking that this perfect bestest son of God did a coup and was cast out as punishment to be a tyrant. It's a little bit weird, and that can still work with the way that what's his face, Mesmer, could be still somewhat reverent to Marika, because, you know, potentially being the creation of a god still allows them to revere it, even if they're cast out by said god. And says, if I have time, I may check out the latest lore video by Level T. I may have watched that one the other day, but I'm not sure which one is his latest. So, if you guys ever have recommendations for videos you want me to watch on stream, always feel free to place that either in the comment section of these videos, so that way I can remember when I have a free chance to add them into my playlist, or do it on my Discord server, which is linked at the top of the chat here, or somewhere in my video description in my channel feedback page, or channel, so that way I can add them to the list and get to them someday. Thanks, Corporate. Appreciate that. Alright, going back to the video. Alright.
Now once more we're going to delve into the batshit insane, as we always do on this channel, and I'm going to perform some tomfoolery surgery onto all of your frontal cortexes. Am I going crazy, or does the spiral pattern on these weapons not look like a double helix? Double helixes are molecules of DNA, and as we know, DNAs are the foundation blocks of ourselves. They make...
Yeah, I think I made this comparison on my video about the Gloamite Queen as well. That's like one of the first things I thought of when I saw this. I just absolutely love a lot of the design about the Godslayer Greatsword, because there's just so much to it. And I guess like maybe this is kind of even further support. Oh yeah, he'll probably make this point. So yeah, I'll shut up and let him make it.
Because what we are. I think it really makes a lot of sense for the followers of the Gloamite Queen to have this sort of homage to the double helix. The Gloamite Queen and her followers use the black flame, which is this all-slaying flame. It is ignorant to all of the conceptions perceived and created by the Golden Order. It is true life. Without death, life is meaningless, and the Golden Order changes that and twists it into a way that should not be the case. Don't you think it's a bit strange that then when the Golden Order comes round, to my knowledge, this sort of patterning disappears, is completely isolated to the followers of the Gloamite Queen? I believe this is because the Golden Order breaks the natural order. Things don't die. Death is removed from the Elden Ring for certain people. It is a violation of the natural order, and I think that the reason why this spiral pattern isn't used inside their weapons is because they know it, and they know that they have broken the world.
So yeah, I think that's a really good observation, and I think maybe a point that would have strengthened my own video about the Gloamite Queen would be trying to emphasize that if Marika represents life, and the Gloamite Queen's sword kind of also signifies life, that there might be a stronger thematic connection between them. But I do think Gecko did a very good job here. He did say something which kind of struck me as a little bit off that I wanted to think about a bit more, or like I wanted to touch on, but I kind of lost it there. So I'm going to back up a bit, perhaps. Is this it? Oh, yeah. The idea of the double helix lifestyle pattern not appearing in Golden Order stuff. I would need to think about that, but I don't really think this shows up too much with Erdtree stuff to begin with either. But I guess like the Erdtree stuff also depends on whether one thinks that the Rune of Death was removed at the onset of Marika's age or later on. That might help some interpretations, I suppose. So maybe I'll need to think about it from like both perspectives before I give like a strong opinion about that. Chadwick says, is everyone finally coming on to see all the spirals and undulation waves everywhere? So, okay, yeah. Now that I remember. Okay, so we do get this kind of spirally type thing sort of going on with the Finger Slayer blade and the Sacred Relic blade. So I don't know if it's necessarily fair to say that the Golden Order doesn't have this entirely, but I would still be in fair agreement that this is life, but if this blade came from a corpse like the Finger Slayer blade or the Sacred Relic sword, then that might also explain this and not necessarily be too evocative of the power of life within Death and Black Flame nonetheless. But even setting all that stuff aside, I definitely agree with the assessment of the duality between life and death that Gecko was just positing here a moment ago. Hey, Inigo Montoya. I did not kill your father, first and foremost, but welcome to the stream. You have a lore question. Why is it called Margit's Shackle and not Morgoth's Shackle? That's a really excellent question that we don't have a fantastic answer for, but maybe because he was in incognito mode and was known more as Margit then, or Morgoth could have potentially been the name that he could have gotten after he was given grace. And so maybe he was Margit originally. Might be one way to try to cope with this kind of situation there. How many fingers do I have? 10. And that means 5 on each hand. D-Rock says the double helix is on the Crucible Knight armor too. Interesting. I would need to double check. Oh, okay, yeah, at the base with all of the crossed tree type iconography. That's fair. That's fair. Why would they represent DNA? Is there a reason? I think like the Crucible represents primordial aspects of life in general, so they're very life aligned, and so I think death is paradoxically life aligned as well because it's the other half of the coin there. Hey Otoako, thanks, I appreciate that. Yeah, the videos have been interesting. And Sebastian, welcome to stream. And then Pony says in Burke the Burke tree is a spiral. Alright, let's go back in.
Perceived and created by the Golden Order. It is true life. Without death, life is meaningless, and the Golden Order changes that and twists it into a way that should not be the case. Don't you think it's a bit strange that then when the Golden Order comes round, to my knowledge, this sort of patterning disappears, is completely isolated to the followers of the Gloam-eyed Queen? I believe this is because the Golden Order breaks the natural order. Things don't die. Death is removed from the Elden Ring for certain people. It is a violation of the natural order, and I think that the reason why this spiral pattern isn't used inside their weapons is because they know it, and they know that they have broken the world. Now, of course, on a
Chadwick says, "Gah, I was wailing about all this a month ago in the Discord, and everyone just ignored you. You're John the Baptist." I mean, I've been on the whole Marika equals Gek train probably longer than most, but you know, it's kind of a very well hashed topic at this point, at least in my Discord server. So sometimes I just don't have the energy to hash it all out over again. So get wrecked. GG no re, Chadwick. Galamoth said they only joined the Discord recently, but they would have discussed it. Yeah. Hey, Emily, yes, I actually have watched St. Trina's lore videos. I was actually in St. Trina's streams before I think she was making the YouTube's content. But yeah, I actually reacted to that one live on stream too. You said that was new to you? You mean the helixes? But yeah, okay. Alright, Chadwick, very well. Hey, Mao, how's it going? You missed pretty much the stream at this point, my guy.
Biological level, they are still going to have double helixes, but I think this is a really direct symbolic way of conveying the fact that the Gloam-eyed Queen and her followers are following the true order, whereas the Golden Order is not. Again, just my thoughts. I know that last little bit's a bit batshit insane, but I am truly convinced that that is what's going on. Although, if you have different opinions.
The funny thing is, I feel like the bit about the helixes is probably one of the more measured claims so far with respect to whether or not how one thinks such claims would interact with the Finger Slayer blade and the Sacred Relic blade more specifically.
opinions, of course, that's totally fine. And I appreciate that, because I think at this point where we are in the DLC and the information we have, the more different theories we have, the higher chance we have of actually finding out what is going on. Sadly everyone, that is the end of the video. If you did enjoy the video, please consider leaving a like and subscribe, as it greatly helps the channel. And it lets me know that you're enjoying this style of content and want to see more. I really...
All right, you guys heard the dogs in the background too. I was like trying not to laugh at it. It's kind of funny. Ooh, man, this one got a lot of dislikes. And keep in mind, like the plugin that I have like doesn't even give us the accurate number. So that just goes, oh, this is only 2 days old. I didn't even realize. So yeah, I'm sure this video will continue to grow and make people angry until the DLC drops, and then we all get proven right. Anyway, no, I'm joking a little bit. So, yeah, I definitely enjoyed this video. As always, I'm going to link it into the chat before playing through the very end of it right there.
I really hope you did enjoy this one. I hope you're having a great day, and I'm not going to hold you any longer because I know I ramble to shit and back at the end of these videos. Please, don't you dare go hollow, and may you find your worth in the waking life.
The damn dog.
Bye, everyone.
I'm just like imagining my guy like losing it, like shut up at the very end of like signing off right there. Yeah, I know like sometimes it's kind of fun to have the dogs in there, but I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I just have to do multiple takes and try to voice record while my dogs are not active, which is a bit challenging at times, to be honest. Oh man, I have so many takes where like I finally nail the lines that I've been like struggling at for multiple takes, and then like the dog snores in the background. Actually, yeah, let's go ahead and share some forbidden Last Protagonist audio issues. All right. Maybe I don't have it like super saved. Oh no, this is a bad idea. I forgot I had desktop audio super boosted because of this video. Let me turn it back to normal and then probably turn it down. So, okay, that is normal. I'm going to lower it normally. All right, so, yeah, I was recording something, and then, like, the dog started playing, and then we got this. Yep. So those are the struggles of being a content creator that the man doesn't want you to see. Wan, indeed. Stella says, it represents DNA, gives you Jordan Peterson vibes, saying the ancient twin snake motifs represent DNA vibes, when it's just because people saw snakes mating. Well, to be fair, I think like in the ancient times, people did know about DNA, so that kind of criticism is more fair and levied. But now I feel like when we see the double helix design, most people associate it with DNA. Sebastian says, if Marika was the Gek and swaddled and raised Mesmer at that point, it makes sense why he looks like a Godskin apostle, down to the body structure and face. He could be a Godskin turned warlord in the Shadowlands. So, as to like the Mesmer situation, I would probably be more on the side of agreement if I saw him have like a Godskin-esque tail, but all of that red is very different, and maybe like Black Flame wasn't exactly black before the removal of Destined Death. Maybe that's one way we can reconcile such things, but yeah, I don't know whether I would agree that what's his face, Mesmer looks like a Godskin exactly. Eladelia says people are having their patience tested. Maybe. Quelaag dog snorts. Oh my god, yeah. There's that one video she had where there's like the counter going on for Coop, I think it was. This is fantastic. Your sleep paralysis demon. Mao doesn't think the Golden Order is unnatural. I would strongly disagree. Because of like the removal of death. Oh, Inigo had a question? Oh, so you asked... So we actually talked about this the other day on stream, or maybe it was yesterday. I can't quite recall. No, it was the one with Moxie. In that... Marika does say that she herself is a tarnished in the Round Table Hold. There are no item descriptions which outright confirm she's tarnished, but since Hugh is tarnished and is in the Round Table Hold, I do think it is fair to question whether or not everyone who can go to the Round Table Hold is tarnished to begin with. But one thought that we had in the chat, which I don't remember who posited the idea, but I think is a really good one, would be that our player character dies when we get called into the Lands Between, but we're told that Roderika and her retinue arrived via ship. So she may not have been called to the Lands Between the proper way, and that may be why she hasn't seen grace, because she didn't die and get called back specifically. But she could still be tarnished, perhaps. Inigo says, why does nobody care about Hugh crafting a god-slaying weapon to kill Marika, mumbling the whole time about killing Marika? I will one-up you and say, how come nobody seems to care that Marika wants to kill a god, but they would disagree that she would be a god slayer herself? I mean, obviously that's a bit of a straw man, but I do think there is like perhaps a kernel of truth to it. And Starling says, the elves travel by boat to the afterlife in Lord of the Rings. Right. And so we're also told of a spirit realm in the game and the Helfen Steeple description. So it's really strange to me whether or not the Lands Between should be considered like an afterlife. If so, are they kind of a limbo before spirits can pass on into like the kind of Elden Ring equivalent of heaven? And is that version of heaven the spirit realm, or is there something beyond that? We don't really know. And then of course, like, where the hell did the tarnished go when they're not in the Lands Between? Like, where did the confessors come from, etc.? MK asks, is there sun in Shadowlandistan? Well, we do see seemingly sunlight behind the shadow tree in one of the trailers there, so potentially. At the very least, it has a moon, maybe even two. And Necrofear, welcome to the stream. The first scene reminds you of the phrase, I was born at the foot of the Erdtree. Are you talking about for the second trailer with Marika and everything with that? Those questions have been driving you crazy? Yeah. No worries, and welcome into the chat. Pony says, Hugh does say he needs to be more careful about the prayer we catch him muttering, so it's likely no one else knows except us, and that the weapon is a type of commission for a specific person. Maybe. Mao said, for the god-killing weapon, you thought she was wanting to kill herself or the Elden Beast. I mean, she's still trying to kill a god, whether that be the Elden Beast or herself. You're talking about the second trailer, Necra? Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah, so that really depends on whether or not we think those the corpse piles are meant to be the Erdtree, or meant to be something which goes on to become the Erdtree. But yeah, it's definitely very evocative of the idea of birthing the Erdtree due to the kind of dialogue which talks about the birth of gold and shadow with it. Hey Orana, welcome on in. Thanks for the greetings from Sweden. Unfortunately, this tends to be like, well, after I like to end the stream. So for anybody who might be unfamiliar, I try to go about like 3 hours, but I'll pretty much always go over if the content kind of like dictates it. And at this point, I mean, I don't really have a set time for ending because I've gone consistently over 3 hours for a very long time now. So yeah, we've gone through all the videos that I had queued up for stream tonight, and I do need to catch some sleep. So This will be the end of tonight's stream, unfortunately, but the good news is if you missed out on anything, all of my stuff is always archived on the live section of my channel here, and we do go live pretty consistently at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time every night. So, once again, all of you, thank you for joining in and being active in the chat, lurking or catching the VODs. I appreciate it. Hopefully, we'll catch you on the next one. Till then, take care, stay safe. Last Protagonist out.